Long before the names we know, the languages we speak, or the borders drawn with trembling pens, there was only the hush of the Andes, a great spine of stone that pierced the heavens and ran the length of a continent, whispering to the stars above and the rivers below. The earth there did not sleep. It breathed, and the breath smelled of wet earth, burning sage, and the smoke of 1,000 hearths yet to come. Somewhere between sky and soil, the first dream of an empire stirred. It is said that the sun itself, Inti, looked down upon the trembling earth and saw no order, no harmony, only scattered peoples crawling across the highlands like wind-blown dust. And so, in the hushed space between myth and morning, Inti sent his children. Manco Capac and Mama Oclo rose from the waters of Lake Titicaca, not like mortals, but like memory, already formed, already sacred, clothed in golden light and tasked with a mission not of conquest, but of balance, to find the navel of the world, Cusco, and there plant the golden staff that would sink not into chaos, but into destiny. This, the Inca would later say, was how order was born. But what is the beginning of a story that began before the beginning? Was it a whisper from a god, or the hush of a mountain storm? Was it a child's breath against a woven slingstone? Or was it the stillness of time before the first thread was pulled? Even now, you can hear it, if you are still enough. The cry of a condor riding the wind above Machu Picchu, its shadow falling across terraces that step like prayer stairs into the mist. The stone still sings, though the mouths are long gone. The breath of the empire lingers in the moss. But tonight, you are not here to walk among ruins. You are here to rest inside a story carved not with words, but with silence and stone. The Inca did not write. They tied color-coded knots into quipu strings and carried stories on their backs, in memory and breath. They remembered with their fingers, their footsteps, their rituals, and because they could not write their beginning, the world wrote it for them, sometimes in reverence, more often in conquest. But this is not their end, not yet. First, there will be stars to follow and rivers to cross. There will be lands to gather under the banner of the sun, and there will be songs sung in Quechua that rise and fall like the wind through puna grass. There will be roads, oh yes, thousands of miles of roads laid like sacred veins across the body of a continent. Roads that pulse with messengers running barefoot through cloud and jungle, with breath and memory carried in woven cords. Roads that do not forget. There will be kings whose names ring like thunder. Pachacuti, the earth shaker. Tupac Yupanqui, the explorer. Huayna Capac, who held the world in his palm and did not know it was slipping. But that is later. For now, we are in the beginning, where all things still feel possible, where the empire is not yet fallen, and the myths still breathe. It begins here, in the hush before the drums, in the frost-dusted morning where a boy, born from lake and god, carries a golden staff and feels the weight of sunlight behind his eyes. He walks, not knowing he walks toward legend, and the mountains watch, and the earth listens. The condor circles once more. Above the clouds, something sacred has begun. You may close your eyes now. You are not missing it. You are already within it. The empire is waking, and so are you. In the beginning, the earth was not a place, but a presence. To the people of the Andes, the land was alive, not owned, not tamed, but known. Mountains were not piles of stone. They were apus, sacred beings who watched from their icy thrones, breathed snow, and listened with deep patience. Rivers were not water, but veins of the Great Mother, Pachamama, her voice soft and endless, whispering through the valleys. The people who lived here before empire wove their lives into this breathing world. They planted potatoes at altitudes where breath thinned, carved terraces into cliffs that scraped the sky, and followed the sun not as a god to worship, but as a kin to understand. They were skyborn, earth-fed, storm-raised. They were not Inca yet, not until the story chose them. Long before Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, was born, the Andean highlands were home to countless scattered cultures, each rooted in rock, cloud, and time. The Nazca, the Moche, the Wari, the Tiwanaku. Each rose and fell like the breath of mountains. Each left behind offerings, broken pottery, temples aligned with solstice light, and bones sleeping beneath ash. But it was Tiwanaku, by the sacred lake, that whispered most clearly to what would become the Inca. On the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, stone giants slept in silence. Monoliths etched with ancient geometry stood watch as the sun spilled golden light across their faces each dawn. Here, the myths of birth took form. Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, children of Inti, stepped from the lake not with violence, but with purpose. Their golden staff pierced the earth only where the world said yes, and Cusco, the navel, the center, said yes. It is a myth, but it is more than myth. It is memory wrapped in metaphor, a truth retold until it became sacred, and sacred things endure. The skyborn people believed in cycles, in balance, night and day, rain and drought, sowing and harvest, life and death. Every act had a counterpart, and every being a responsibility. The world was not to be ruled, it was to be held. The Inca would come to call this harmony Aini, the sacred principle of reciprocity. You give to the earth gives back. You serve the people carry you. It was not empire yet, not in the way Rome drew borders or Babylon built towers, but it was becoming. From the scattered highland communities, a lineage began to rise. It moved slowly, like fog curling around stone. Families grew, clans merged, beliefs intertwined like the fibers of compi, the finest woven cloth. And through it all, the idea of order, of cosmos, took root. And above all, the sun watched. Inti, the sun god, was not distant. He was not wrathful. He was warmth, clarity, rhythm. He rose every morning, and so must the people. He fed the maize, and so the people fed one another. He sat above, not in arrogance, but in guardianship. And the Inca would be his shadow upon the earth. Not merely a king, but a bridge between sky and soil. A supper Inca, the only Inca, the child of the sun, the one who bore the burden of balance. But that too was later. Here now, in these high valleys cradled by snow and silence, the people told stories by firelight. They looked to the stars not for conquest, but for guidance. The constellations were not lions or centaurs. They were llamas, foxes, serpents. Familiar shapes, neighbors, reminders. They planted by moonlight. They listened to the wind before building homes. They buried their dead facing the rising sun, not in sorrow, but in anticipation. For death was not an end. It was a return to the cycle. To live was to walk a path already traced by ancestors, by stars, by spirits that curled like smoke through the peaks. To stray from that path was not forbidden, but it was dangerous. The world was sacred, and the sacred must not be broken. So they watched, they waited, they whispered to stone and sky, and then, from the quiet, came movement. The small kingdom of Cusco began to stir. Its leaders no longer looked only to their valleys, but beyond. The time of gathering was near. The myths had given them origin. The land had given them home. Now the sun asked for more. The skyborn people would rise, not with the noise of battle, not yet, but with the breath of purpose, the hush before the hawk dives, the silence of a loom before the first thread is pulled. They were not conquerors, not yet, but the world was listening, and the gods had begun to lean closer. At first, Cusco was not grand, not a city of golden walls or marble halls. It was a valley, quiet and green, cradled by mountains that folded like ancient hands around it. There were no palaces, only packed earth and promise, but the breath of something sacred lingered there. And breath, in time, becomes voice, and voice becomes law. The Inca say it began with Manco Capac, son of the sun, bearer of the golden staff. He walked until the earth softened beneath him, until his staff sank effortlessly into soil, as if the world itself bowed. This, he said, is the center, the Cusco, the navel. And so began the slow birth of a capital not with trumpets, but with ritual. Stones laid by moonlight, offerings buried beneath thresholds, lines traced in starlight and shadow, not for beauty, but for balance. Manco Capac did not raise an empire. He raised memory, and memory does not forget. The early kings of Cusco, known now as Sapa Inca, one at a time, were not yet conquerors. They were gatherers, builders, priests in motion, Sinchi Roca, Loke Yupanqui, Maita Capac, names like stepping stones across a fog-draped river. They did not rush. They watched the stars. They studied the winds. They carved irrigation canals that sang like silver threads across the hillsides. They did not ask the land to serve them. They asked the land to speak, and in time it did. The highlands around Cusco were no easy place to build. Cold crept into lungs. Crops fought for breath in thin air. But the Inca had no fear of hardship, only of imbalance. They terraced the mountains, not to subdue them, but to invite them to yield. Each stone placed not only for strength, but for song. The walls they built leaned slightly inward, as if bowing to heaven, an architecture of deference. These early rulers were quiet fires. They gathered peoples, not through force, but through marriage, negotiation, and the slow allure of order. They spoke not of rule, but of Ailu, the kin group, the collective. You did not live for yourself. You lived as a thread in a sacred tapestry. The empire was still sleeping, but in these quiet generations, its bones were forming. And then, as the breath grew steadier, came Capac Yupanqui, fifth in the line, but first to dream of distance. He stepped beyond the sacred valley, tested the roads, sent warriors not to claim, but to ask. Sometimes asking is enough, sometimes it is not. And so small battles flickered like candlelight across the highlands. Not yet conquest, but rehearsal. A rehearsal for what would come in fire and gold. But not yet, for now Cusco grew like a sacred seed, its streets aligned with solstice, its temples echoing the mountains that watched above. The Coricancha, the golden temple of the sun, rose not like a fortress, but like a breath held in reverence. Walls of perfectly fitted stone, no mortar, no mistake. Each piece shaped not only by hand, but by memory. Here the sun touched earth, and the earth in turn shone. The Inca saw time not in lines, but in circles. They marked the year not with dates, but with rituals. Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, bloomed like fire in the streets. Men and women danced. Priests lifted offerings. The Sapa Inca stood at the center, not as God, but as echo. An echo of Inti, an echo of the ancestors, an echo of what the world once was and might be again. For the early Inca kings, power was not seized. It was invited. It moved through stories, through shed breath, through the rhythm of hands planting maize and weaving compi fine enough to clothe gods. They knew the future would not be theirs to hold. They were laying the road, stone by stone, a road their sons would one day run. And far beyond Cusco, in valleys where the sun fell differently, other chieftains watched. They saw the stonework. They heard the songs. They began to send their daughters to Cusco, their messengers to parley. A tide was rising, but it rose in silence, not with swords, not with fire, but with awe, with the realization that Cusco was not just a village. It was becoming a center, a heart that beat for more than one people. And so, the first kings built, not for themselves, but for the sun. Not for glory, but for alignment. They lived like roots, disappearing beneath the soil so something vaster could rise. And above them, always, the mountains watched, their breath slow, their patience endless. The empire had not yet spoken, but it was listening. And soon, very soon, it would answer. The sun had not yet reached its zenith. Cusco stood, proud but small, golden but fragile. The early Inca kings had tended the fire, shaped the stone, whispered to the gods. But the world beyond still trembled with uncertainty. Enemies gathered like clouds beyond the mountains, and the gods, though revered, waited. Then came the war. It began not with fanfare, but with dread. The Chanca, fierce warriors of the Western Highlands, moved like a wave of stone and bone. Their message was not one of diplomacy. It was the sound of drums and ash, the promise of ruin. They marched toward Cusco not to conquer it, but to erase it. And the king, Viracocha Inca, fled. They say he saw what was coming and chose safety. He took his heir with him, but one son remained behind, Cusi Yupanqui, a boy not yet king, a prince not yet legend, left not out of duty, but absence. He had not been chosen, so he chose himself. He stood on the hill above Cusco, watching the valley tighten with the shadow of war. He was not armored, he was not ready, but he understood something others had forgotten. When the world breaks, someone must choose where to begin the repair. He gathered what warriors remained, elders, farmers, runners, smiths. He invoked the gods not in fear, but as kin. He went to the temple of the sun and offered not gold, but himself. And the gods answered, or so they say. That night the stars spun strangely. The river hissed like a serpent. The condors did not sleep. And by morning, the boy had become the quake, the battle that followed lives in the marrow of Andes stone. The Chanca charged, warriors painted for death, eyes bright with destruction. But the defenders of Cusco fought like fire. They did not break, they rose. Some say the stones themselves stood up and struck the Chanca, that shadows moved on their own, that the gods did not merely watch, they joined. What is myth to one ear is memory to another. What matters is this: the Chanca fell, Cusco stood, and Cusi Yupanqui became Pachacuti, he who shakes the earth. But conquest was not what made him great. It was vision. Pachacuti looked at Cusco and saw not a city, but a mirror of the cosmos. He redrew it, not with ink, but with ceremony and stone. He rebuilt temples, realigned roads, widened plazas. He reshaped the capital as the center, the literal and sacred center of all the world. Every wall, every step, every shadow cast at solstice was deliberate. Cusco became a golden puma, the sacred feline, its tail curling through rivers, its heart in the Coricancha, where the sun kissed gold. But Pachacuti did not stop at home. He sent envoys, messengers, builders, warriors, priests, not only to conquer, but to connect, not only to claim land, but to bring it into balance. He was not a destroyer. He was a cartographer of belief. The world, he said, would be Tawantinsuyu, the land of four quarters, each extending like limbs from Cusco's sacred heart. Chinchaysuyu to the north, Antisuyu to the east, Kolasuyu to the south, Kuntisuyu to the west. 4 arms, 1 body, an empire of balance. And where there was resistance, he sent armies, not to scorch, but to reshape. Where there were valleys, he laid terraces. Where there were tribes, he wove alliances. Where there were silences, he carved roads. The Chapak Nyan, the royal road, stretched like sinew through cliffs and jungle, over rivers and snow. Not just a path for travel, but for tribute, for news, for breath. Messengers, chaskis, ran day and night, bearing messages in memory and knotted string. There were no wheels, no beasts of burden, only lungs, legs, and the urgency of the sun. Under Pachacuti, the Inca did not merely expand. They radiated. Stone by stone, soul by soul, he pulled a fractured world into a rhythm. He built storehouses and way stations. He sent architects to carve temples into mountaintops. He moved entire populations to preserve unity, a policy called mitma, both wise and cruel. He honored the dead as if they still ruled, because they did. Mummies of past kings were dressed, fed, consulted. The line between life and afterlife was not a wall, but a veil. Pachacuti understood what the world forgot, that death is not disappearance, it is transformation. He himself began to prepare his tomb long before dying, a palace not of mourning, but of waiting. Stone chambers aligned to stars, a resting place for a king who would never truly rest. And when he finally laid down the staff, after decades of reshaping the known world, the earth did not shake. It sighed, for the earth shaker had walked through time and left it altered. And the sun lingered a little longer that day. The Andes do not yield easily. They rise like ancient ribs, holding up the sky, towering, jagged, impossible. To cross them is to ask the earth permission. To build upon them is to be heard and remembered. And the Inca were remembered. They did not conquer with noise. They moved in rhythm, in patterns, in steps. The empire, Tawantinsuyu, had no wheel, no horses, no written script. Yet it stretched across thousands of miles, from the burning coastlines of what is now Ecuador to the silver-dusted peaks of what is now Chile and Argentina. 4 quarters, 1 heart. How did it breathe? With roads. They called it the Chapak Nyan, the royal road, the great vein. Not one path, but a network. A lattice of stone and earth that wove together mountains, forests, deserts, and sea cliffs. A system so vast it connected what seemed unconnectable. Over 25,000 miles, a spine of civilization. But it was not just distance that mattered, it was intention. Every curve, every step was aligned to terrain, to sun, to spirit. They did not flatten the land, they harmonized with it. Steps carved into rock faces, switchbacks winding like serpent paths up slopes too steep to dream of. Rope bridges stretched across canyons like threads pulled tight between gods. They used stone, clay, sand, and fire-hardened gravel. Where rain threatened erosion, they built drainage. Where stone refused to move, they carved it. Where rivers roared, they listened, and then built. The roads were not merely routes, they were rituals. Every journey was a conversation with the land, and along these sacred veins the empire moved, not just goods or soldiers, but breath, messages, decrees, tribute, memory. At the center of it all stood Cusco, not just a capital, but a beating heart. From its golden temples radiated the 4 Suyus. each with its own rhythm, culture, and spirit. The roads were not meant to erase these differences, but to bind them, to hold together a people scattered by nature, to sing a song in 4 voices carried on the wind. And along these roads ran the Chasqui, messengers swift and sacred, trained from childhood to memorize messages, to carry meaning not on paper, but in muscle and breath. They ran in relays day and night, hand to hand, carrying orders from the Sapa Inca as if they were divine sparks. They bore quipu, knotted strings that held accounting, tribute, history, a system without letters, yet rich with meaning. The knots were the language, the spaces between them, the grammar. The empire remembered itself not with ink but with touch, and when the Chasqui reached a tambos, a roadside shelter, he would rest and pass the message, and another would run, and another. From the edge of the jungle to the frozen passes of the Altiplano, the message never stopped. Time itself moved along these roads, and where the roads passed, the land changed. Storehouses, kolkas, dotted the route, filled with maize, potatoes, dried meat, salt. Surpluses gathered not for luxury, but for balance. In famine, food would arrive. In flood, shelter. In war, warriors. It was a system built not on greed, but on equilibrium. Each region offered what it had. Each region received what it lacked. A nation woven like cloth, tight, intricate, resilient. And still the roads climbed, to places no empire had reached, over glaciers, across deserts, through jungle vines thick as history, to the sacred places, to Machu Picchu, hidden in cloud and time, not a city of conquest, but of retreat, a temple folded into mountain, a place where Pachacuti, the earth shaker, might listen to the gods without noise, where stone melted into horizon and the stars leaned closer. Even there the road reached, not just to carry people, but to carry silence, because that was the genius of the Inca. They did not build to be seen, they built to belong, and so their empire held, not because of walls, but because of roads, because a road is not merely a passage, it is a promise that no matter how high the mountain, how fierce the rain, how deep the valley, we will reach you. You are not forgotten. You are part of the pattern. You are one stone in the great weave of earth and sky. And when you walk the Chapakñan, you do not walk alone. You walk with gods. You walk with memory. You walk with the breath of the empire beneath your feet. To understand the Inca, you must close your eyes, not to darkness, but to see as they saw, not with the eyes, but with the breath. Because the Inca did not separate the world and the divine. They saw no line between stone and spirit, no wall between waking and dreaming. Their empire was not just land, it was meaning. And at the center of it, burning, constant, sacred, was the sun. Inti, not a god far away in clouds and thunder, but one who walked with them every day. He fed the crops, marked the seasons, watched the battles, blessed the marriages, judged the kings. He was not just warmth, he was rhythm. To displease Inti was to unweave the world. And so they watched the skies, not for omens, but for alignment. Where the light fell, they built. When the light paused, they danced. When it waned, they wept. The most sacred place in all the empire was the Coricancha, the temple of the sun, the golden enclosure. In Cusco, the navel of the world. Here, the walls were laid with stones so perfect, you could not fit a whisper between them. And over those stones, they placed sheets of gold, not for vanity, but to reflect Inti himself. When the sun rose, it did not rise only in the sky. It rose in the temple walls. It bloomed across the faces of golden cornstalks, golden llamas, golden infants, offerings that stood not as idols, but as echoes. To step inside the Coricancha was not to enter a room. It was to step into order, a place where everything had its place, every star its season, every prayer its direction. And from here, the Sapa Inca would look out, not as a man looking over land, but as a son looking to his father. Because that's what the Inca believed the Sapa Inca was, the child of the sun, not metaphorically, but truly. His blood was golden, his breath warmed by celestial flame. He did not rule by force, but by lineage. To obey him was to obey light, and yet the Inca did not worship only the sun. The world was full of huacas, sacred places, sacred stones, sacred waters. Every cave had memory, every boulder had voice, every spring knew something you did not. Mountains, especially, were gods. Apus. They looked down, silent and eternal. Each village had its own apu, a guardian, an elder, a skyborn judge. Offerings were left in their shadow. Coca leaves, chicha beer, shells from distant coasts. And sometimes, when the balance needed restoring, a child, yes, even that. For sacrifice to the Inca was not violence, it was gift, and a gift of purest breath was the one the gods understood best. But such things were rare. Most days, the gods were fed with song, with rhythm, with patience. The Inca lived by the calendar, not of days, but of feeling. They marked time with festivals, each one a thread in the tapestry of the year. Most sacred of all was Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, held at the winter solstice, when the sun was farthest, when the world felt most fragile. A time to remind the gods of their promise. For 9 days, the city of Cusco became flame. Men fasted, women wept, priests chanted in Quechua, the language of the earth, the wind, the bones of ancestors. And when the Sapa Inca stepped out of the temple, draped in feathers and gold, the people did not cheer. They fell silent, because this was not theatre, it was rebirth. The Inca believed that if they did not honor the sun, it would not return. So they gave all they had. They lit fires without flame, using only sunlight focused through mirrors. They poured chicha onto the earth. They raised their hands in silence, and the sun at last began its return. The Sapa Inca drank first, and then poured the rest to the ground, so that all might be nourished. Because to the Inca, the world was not owned. It was shared. Even the dead were not gone. They lived in homes, were dressed, federal, consulted. They sat in council. They watched from shadowed rooms. They whispered to their children in dreams. There was no death, only relocation. The body stayed. The breath moved on. And so the empire did not fear mortality. It prepared for it. Each person knew their role. Farmers, weavers, warriors, priests. Each gift was honored. Each skill woven into the whole. From the highland terrace to the jungle outpost, the people worked not for self, but for Aini. Reciprocity. You gave to the earth. You gave to the gods. You gave to each other. And in return, you received balance. Not perfection, but rhythm. And that, to the Inca, was paradise. Not golden towers, not infinite conquest, just a world in step with itself. A sun that rose when called. A God who walked beside them. A people who remembered how to listen. Pachacuti, the earth shaker, did not leave silence behind. He left momentum. Stone that remembered his hand. Roads that pulsed with his breath. A capital humming with order, and an empire, newly named, newly shaped, asking quietly, "What now?" He left behind sons, as kings do, but only one would wear his cloak. Tupac Inca Yupanqui, the son who had marched beside him, who had watched cities fall and rise again, who had studied the roads not only as pathways, but as promises. Where Pachacuti dreamed, Tupac moved. He was not a founder. He was an architect of momentum. The boy who had learned to listen to stone now spoke with it. And the land listened. His reign began not with war, but with direction. He looked beyond where the maps ended, not with hunger, but with rhythm. The empire had 4 quarters. He would walk their edges. North, where the jungle breathed thick and wet. South, where the highlands sharpened to snow. West, where the Pacific whispered secrets. East, where rivers ran toward the unknown. He did not stay in Cusco. He moved, and the empire moved with him. With each step, he extended the thread, absorbing coastal kingdoms, crossing deserts with camelids and patience, asking not just will you join us, but will you be us? And most said yes, because to join the Inca was not to be erased, but to be woven in. Your crops would be protected, your gods honored, your children fed. In exchange, your tribute, your loyalty, your breath added to the whole. Those who resisted met not just warriors, but a tide. For the Inca fought not only with slings and spears, they fought with structure. They dismantled chaos by replacing it, with storehouses, terraces, temples, with order, even across the sea. Yes, even there. They say Tupac Inca Yupanqui built ships, sailed west from the coast of what is now Ecuador, to islands far beyond sight, where he found people with dark skin and strange tongues. He returned with gold, with seeds, with stories. Some call it myth, others history. But the Inca never drew hard lines between the two. In their world, if something was remembered, it was true. And Tupac was deeply remembered. He brought back more than wealth. He brought rhythm, that quiet, sacred consistency that allows an empire not just to expand, but to hold. He appointed governors. He oversaw census. He refined the quipu, the knotted code. He respected the land but commanded it, and the land in turn yielded. The crops grew thicker. The terraces climbed higher. The roads stretched farther. It was not conquest. It was convergence. And when he laid down his crown, his son was ready. Huayna Capac, born in empire, shaped by empire, ruled an empire, but did not yet see its edge. He was young and full of clarity. Not a dreamer, a steward. He did not have to build the empire. He had to hold it. And so he did. Under Huayna Capac, the empire reached its greatest size, stretching over 2,500 miles of jagged terrain, embracing millions of souls, each one accounted for, each one tied to the great breath. He moved northward, settled in Tumibamba, a new center in the highlands of present-day Ecuador. He wanted to be closer to the new edge, the new rhythm. But distance, even in empires of breath, creates silence, and silence in time becomes fracture. Still, Huayna Capac ruled with purpose. He enforced Mitma, the strategic relocation of populations, ensuring that loyalty was spread, that no one region grew too independent. It was wise, it was harsh, it held the heart of empire. He built palaces that sang in stone. He reinforced roads, summoned armies, held ceremony upon ceremony, each one reminding the gods and the people, we are still in step. But even the most careful rhythm can falter. Far to the north, in the thick green where the jungle breathed too heavily, something waited. Not armies, not rebellion, but something smaller, a whisper, a fever. They say Huayna Capac grew sick after returning from the north. A trembling, sweating silence overtook him. Some said it was the gods, others the wind. But we, with our hindsight and our ruins, we know now it was a plague a sickness carried from a world that had not yet arrived, Europe, the first soft breath of catastrophe. And Huayna Capac died, far from Cusco, far from the center, far from the sun he was born to serve. His body was carried back over mountains. His soul, they said, walked home through the sky. He left behind suns, but not one heir. And the breath of the empire, once steady, once sacred, began to stutter. But that is a story for another night. For now, let us remember them as they were. Pachacuti, the earth-shaker. Tupac Inca Yupanqui, the voyager. Huayna Capac, the steward. 3 kings who did not merely rule, but tuned the world to light. And for a moment, the empire became harmony. And the sun, knowing it was seen, stayed longer in the sky. When an empire is whole, its silence is strong. It holds the space between words, between battles, between kings. But when that silence stirs, when it breaks, it is not always with thunder. Sometimes it begins with breathless waiting. Huayna Capac was gone. His body returned by procession. His memory burned into offerings. But his final words, if he spoke them, were not heard by all. He left no chosen heir, only sons, 2 of them. Huascar, born of Cusco, royal blood from the sacred navel of the world, raised beneath the golden walls of Coricancha, wrapped in the rituals of the old order. And Atahualpa, born of the north, son of a different mother, but of Huayna Capac still, raised in Tumibamba under jungled skies, shaped by a new rhythm, far from the ancient sun. Brothers, yes, but brothers of 2 different hearts, and the empire, that delicate woven cloth, held them both until it couldn't. Huascar remained in Cusco, proclaimed himself Sapa Inca by right of blood and place. The priesthood crowned him. The nobles bowed, but not all did, for Atahualpa was beloved in the north. He had walked the roads. He had commanded armies with his father. He had lived the empire's breath, not merely inherited it. And when messengers arrived to bring him under Huascar's rule, he did not kneel. He stepped back, not in fear, but in preparation. And somewhere along the road between Cusco and Tumibamba, between tradition and motion, between sun and shadow, a quiet war began. At first, it was not named, just shifting loyalties, delays in tribute, pauses in ceremony. But the Quipu keepers knew. The knots began to carry more urgency, more reckoning, and then it spilled, like water breaching a terrace wall. Huascar demanded obedience. Atahualpa refused. Armies were summoned. Generals rose like volcanoes, loyal to blood, but not always the same blood. What followed was not a border war. It was a fracture of meaning. Inca fought Inca, not for land, but for the center, for who would carry the breath of the empire forward, for who could touch the sun. The war moved like thunder through valleys. Cities burned. Temples fell silent. The tambos, way stations once full of chasquis and tribute, filled with the wounded. Loyalists to Huasco wore the old sun, the center, the past. Atahualpa's men wore the flame of expansion, the edge, the future. Neither was wrong. That was the tragedy. But empires cannot serve 2 suns. And Atahualpa, though slower to claim the crown, proved more ready to keep it. He did not charge Cusco blindly. He outweighted it. He let Huascar's armies stretch too far, let them tire, let them unravel. And then he struck. His generals, especially Chalcuchimac and Quizquiz, moved like fire across the Sierra. They swept down with such fury, such calculated precision, that Huascar's forces broke. The Prince of Cusco was captured, humiliated, paraded in chains before his own people. And Atahualpa, still in the north, now ruled the empire in silence. He did not rush to Cusco. He stayed in Cajamarca, let his generals burn the path forward, let the world feel his presence before it saw his face. It was almost over. The roads were almost his. The sun almost bowed again, but the silence once again stirred, not from within. This time it came from the sea. They did not see sails at first, only rumours, whispers of pale men who wore metal for skin, of beasts with hooves and thunder in their hands, of languages that broke the air like knives. They had come before, small, curious, thin as fog, and disappeared. But this time they stayed, and the empire, fractured but still breathing, stood facing them. Two brothers had torn the cloth, and now the wind rushed through the gap. The Spaniards arrived at a moment so precise it felt chosen by gods or fate or both. Atahualpa stood victorious, but not yet crowned. Cusco was still distant, his brother still alive. The civil war had not yet ended. And so, when Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors entered Cajamarca in 1532, they found not a kingdom at war, but a kingdom recovering. Weakened, distracted, divided, they came with gifts, words, smiles, and guns. And Atahualpa, curious, cautious, agreed to meet them. It would be his last moment of true power. But that is for the next breath. For now the empire stands, scarred but immense, a sun caught between brothers, a road trembling beneath two names, and the gods, high in the Andes, watch without speaking, not because they do not care, but because they have seen this before. Cajamarca, a quiet city nestled in the northern highlands, stone courtyards, thermal springs, cool wind under wide sky. It had once been nothing more than a station between movements. Now it would become the fulcrum of an age. The Supper Inca, or rather, the not yet crowned victor of a shattered civil war, waited there. Atahualpa had heard the rumours. Pale men with beards, strange beasts, metal clothes, and thunder in their hands. But how many were they? Fewer than 200. He laughed. What was a handful of foreigners against the sun-woven bones of Tawantinsuyu? The empire stretched for thousands of miles. It breathed in maize, stone, and mountain. It had roads, terraces, armies, gods. These men, these Spaniards, had none of that. They were tired. They were lost. They were guests. So he agreed to meet them. And that was the first unraveling. The Spaniards had come under Francisco Pizarro, a man neither noble nor educated, but something worse, certain. He saw gold in the streets. He saw an emperor without a crown. He saw gods made of light instead of steel, and he saw opportunity. Pizarro and his men had entered Cajamarca carefully. They had not come roaring with banners. They had slipped in like smoke. The city was quiet, not empty, but stilled. The people watched from doorways. The messengers ran in and out of Atahualpa's camp. The tension in the air was not loud. It was tight. Pizarro sent word. He wanted to meet the king. Atahualpa, curious and proud, agreed. But first, he would show power. He entered Cajamarca not alone, but with majesty. Thousands marched before him, draped in feathers and gold. They swept the streets clean as they passed. Dancers, musicians, bearers carried Atahualpa on a litter raised high, his skin radiant in the afternoon light, his head wrapped in cloth of deepest crimson, the royal fringe. He did not come to negotiate. He came to be seen, and the Spaniards, hiding in ambush behind thick stone walls, watched silently. They had prepared the square, cleared it, hid cannons in doorways, placed horses just out of view. They waited for the signal. And then came the priest, Fray Vicente de Valverde, not a soldier, but an envoy of a god Atahualpa did not know. He stepped forward and offered the Bible, spoke words in a tongue no Inca could understand, spoke of sin, of salvation, of a distant king across a distant sea. Atahualpa took the book, held it, opened it, listened for its voice, but it did not speak, so he let it fall to the ground, and with that, the silence ended, the trap closed. Trumpets blared, gunpowder cracked the air, cannons roared, horses, beasts unknown to the Inca, charged from shadow. Steel gleamed, screams rose. Men were cut down without ever touching their enemy. Thousands of unarmed nobles and attendants, decorated, ceremonial, were slaughtered. And Atahualpa, the sun's son, the victor of civil war, the golden breath of the empire, was seized. They did not kill him, not yet. They knew he was worth more alive. In a single evening, the world tilted. The most powerful man on the continent sat in chains, not because he was defeated in battle, but because he trusted his own grandeur. The empire, stretched across mountains and jungles, paused. The runners stopped running. The roads trembled. The priests kept burning offerings, but the gods were silent. Atahualpa, in captivity, remained calm, dignified. He asked what they wanted. The answer, gold. He offered a room, a ransom. He pointed to the walls and said, "I will fill this room with gold, as high as I can reach, and twice over with silver, if you let me go." It was not poetry. It was measured. The Spanish agreed. And so, from across the empire, the gold came, carried on backs in baskets from temples and tombs, melted and stripped, unceremoniously torn from sacred forms, sun discs, ritual cups, ancestral masks. It came from the Coricancha, from sacred valleys, from mountain altars. And Atahualpa waited, but the promise meant nothing. The gold, priceless not in currency, but in breath, in memory, was melted, turned into ingots, made quiet, and Atahualpa, the Golden Prince, the mountain-born sovereign, was no longer needed. They accused him of treason, of plotting, of sorcery, of blasphemy. He was baptized, given a Christian name, and then strangled, not like a king, like a prisoner. And the world watched. Cusco would fall next. The royal line would scatter. Temples would be stripped. The sun's own house desecrated. But all of that came after. It began here, in a courtyard in Cajamarca, in the sound of a book falling to stone, in a trap not made with walls, but with certainty. And the breath of the empire, that ancient measured sacred rhythm, shuddered, and then held, because memory, even in chains, remembers the light. The sun was high over Cusco when the news arrived, not of war, not of victory, but of absence. Atahualpa, who had won the crown in blood, was dead, not fallen in battle, not swallowed by gods, but executed by men who had no right to touch the sacred fringe. The people didn't cry out. They looked at the sky, and the sky, for the first time in 1,000 years, did not seem to answer. The messengers came next, ragged chasquis, breathless and ash-eyed, bearing no quipu, no tribute, only fear. The Sapa Inca was gone. The north was held by pale men in armor. The empire's breath had faltered, but still Cusco waited, because Cusco had always been the heart, because it had endured earthquakes, war, dynastic storms, because it was made of stone that did not forget. But the stone cannot stop what memory alone cannot bear. 1533. Pizarro and his men advanced, not as conquerors in battle, but as ghosts through a door left ajar. There was no army waiting, no shields on the road. The civil war had emptied the land of resistance, and Cusco, still, adorned in ritual, still humming with the songs of Inti Raymi, opened its gates, not in surrender, but in disbelief. The men who entered it that day had never seen such a city. Golden walls, terraced hillsides, streets aligned with starlight, water channels carved so precisely they still murmured in harmony, temples that caught the sun at exact angles, gardens of gold, literal stalks of maize, butterflies, birds, all crafted in precious metal, each a devotion, each a prayer, and the Coricancha, the temple of the sun, a sacred fire at the center of all breath, lined with golden plates, its walls holding not just offerings, but order. The Spaniards removed the gold first, plate by plate, mask by mask, cup by cup, melted, shipped, forgotten. The sun itself, the very face of Inti, was torn from its place and taken. But even this wasn't the end. The city still stood. The road still led here. The people still whispered in Quechua beneath their breath. The gods, if quiet, still watched from the mountains. But then the puppet was crowned. Manco Inca, brother to Atahualpa, crowned by Pizarro as a tool, a gesture, a ghost of legitimacy. He wore the fringe, he spoke the rituals, but behind him stood steel. Cusco, the city that had never been conquered, that had chosen its kings from the blood of the sun, now bowed to men who did not know its name. The women still spun cloth, the priests still lit lamps, but the songs changed, not in tune, in meaning. The Spanish began to build their own palaces atop the ruins, literally stone on stone. Churches rose where temples had been. Courtyards of cathedrals replaced sacred plazas. The Coricancha, once the golden breath of the empire, was turned into a monastery. And so the silence deepened. Because conquest is not just about death. It is about replacement, about saying this never was, while standing atop its bones. And yet, the bones remembered. The people did not stop speaking Quechua, did not forget which mountain was which god, did not erase their lineages. They buried their quipus in dry caves. They whispered names in the fields. They traced sacred lines with bare feet at night. Resistance began to stir. Not in Cusco, not yet, but in the highlands, in the valleys where the road still hummed. Manco Inca, once the Spaniard's puppet, saw the truth too late. He fled the city, escaped into the mountains, called out to the old rhythm, and the rhythm answered. He raised an army. He laid siege to Cusco in 1536, 3 years after it had fallen. For 10 months the city trembled. The Spanish cowered behind their new walls, the very ones built on Inca foundations. Cusco burned. Temples smoldered. The ghosts of the empire walked the streets. But the siege failed. Reinforcements came. Guns shouted again, and Manco Inca retreated. To Vilcabamba, a secret city deep in the jungle, the last breath of the empire, where the sun still rose without foreign prayer. But that is a later chapter. Here now, Cusco fell, not in one day, not in one battle, but over years, in memory, in gold, in silence. The road still led here, but the heart no longer beat in rhythm. And yet, even now, if you walk the streets of Cusco, if you run your hand along the old stones beneath the Spanish plaster, if you sit in the plaza when the wind turns cold, you will feel it. The breath that does not die, the alignment that still holds. Because cities do not fall all at once. They sleep, they wait, they remember. The road did not end at Cusco. It bent. Westward, it climbed into cloud forests, past gorges too deep for memory and vines that closed around breath itself. The Spaniards believed the empire was over. They saw gold melted, kings dethroned, temples unroofed. They heard silence in the streets of Cusco and mistook it for an ending. But they hadn't heard the jungle. The jungle is not loud. It is patient, and deep within it, the Inca were not gone, only changing shape. Vilcabamba, a name spoken not in ceremony but in secrecy, the final refuge of a sun-born line, hidden beyond rivers, beyond Spanish roads, beyond what greed could follow. It was Manco Inca who found it, once a prince, then a puppet, then a rebel. He knew the rhythm of empires and how to survive their collapse. He had seen Cusco fall from within. He had worn the fringe beneath the shadow of steel. He had watched gold, sacred, shaped, whispered into being, melted into lifeless ingots. And so he did not look back. He looked forward, into the forest. With warriors, priests, artisans, and kin, he fled to Vilcabamba. And there, among the rivers and birdsong, he began again. The Neo-Inca state was born, not of expansion, but of endurance. This was not an empire of roads. It was an empire of memory. Temples were rebuilt, smaller, yes, but precise. Rituals resumed, now guarded by trees. Chasqui ran again, though their messages were no longer shouted, only whispered. Manco was not alone. Thousands followed, not just nobles, but farmers, weavers, those who remembered Aini, who knew that harmony was not lost, only misplaced. For nearly 4 decades, the jungle held its breath. The Spaniards knew of Vilcabamba. They sent scouts, envoys, armies. Some never returned. Others returned only with tales of fierce warriors painted with ash, of traps sprung from trees, of towns where no one spoke Spanish, only Quechua and defiance. The Inca had become smoke. Manco Inca ruled not like Pachacuti, not with expansion, but with presence. He taught that to remember was an act of rebellion, that each prayer spoken in Quechua was a flame against forgetting. And so, the jungle, thick with breath, became the last temple of the sun. Even when Manco was assassinated in 1544, betrayed by Spaniards he had once trusted, the fire did not die. His sons continued. Sari Tupac, weary of war, accepted an uneasy peace with the Spanish. He returned to Cusco, was granted titles and land, lived quietly until death. But his brother, Titu Cusi Yupanqui, refused the olive branch. He ruled Vilcabamba with iron patience. He knew peace was always written in foreign ink. He knew forgetting came not with swords, but with names. He allowed missionaries. He heard their words, but he kept the rituals burning at night. The sun still rose on his terms. And when he too died, the last torch passed to Tupac Amaru, not yet the symbol he would one day become, but a boy shaped by shadow. He inherited a kingdom of memory, a capital of birdsong and war cries, a people who no longer trusted time, only breath. But by then, the Spanish no longer tolerated echoes. 1572. They sent an army, this time with precision, with maps, with names, with execution orders already written. Vilcabamba fell, not in glory, but in exhaustion. Tupac Amaru was captured, dragged from the jungle like a myth bound in rope. He was taken to Cusco, paraded through streets where his ancestors once ruled. He did not scream. He did not plead. They beheaded him in the plaza, not for rebellion, for remembrance, because he had dared to keep breathing in Quechua, because he still knew the name of the sun, and with that, they declared the Inca dead. But death is not disappearance, not in the Andes, not in the breath. The empire had already become more than a throne. It had become a language, a road beneath the jungle, a hand weaving cloth in secret, a song sung in fields before planting. Vilcabamba had fallen, but the empire, the real empire, the one built of memory, rhythm, and sky, slipped deeper into the trees, waiting, because the jungle does not forget, it holds, it heals, and sometimes it remembers more clearly than history. The Spaniards wrote that the empire was finished, that the last Sapa Inca had fallen beneath the axe, that the jungle stronghold was no more, that the sun temples had been replaced by churches, that Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, had been stitched shut. They believed conquest ended with the body, but the body was never the empire. The breath was, and breath lingers, in soil, in footsteps, in silence that knows how to wait. After Vilcabamba, the Spanish did what all empires do. They built over what they broke. Temples became cathedrals. Plazas were renamed. Quipus were outlawed. Priests burned the knotted cords in great fires, declaring them works of the devil, afraid of the truths they held. The roads remained, because they were too strong to tear apart. But they were no longer sacred. They became military highways, channels of control rather than connection. The language, Quechua, was allowed for a time, until they realized it remembered too much. Too many prayers, too many names for stars, too many words for balance. They tried to replace it with Spanish, a language of kings, of conquest, of laws etched in foreign stone. But languages are not erased like chalk. They're whispered, from grandmother to child, folded into lullabies, woven into the warp of cloth. And so, Quechua lived. It lives still, spoken by millions across the Andes, not as a tribute to the past, but as inheritance. Because even without a throne, an empire can be carried in the mouth. Even without gold, it can be sewn into shirts. Even without a crown, it can be etched in the pattern of how you plant your corn. The Spanish tried to convert the Andes, but the Andes are slow to move. The people knelt in churches, yes, but their eyes still sought the mountains. They took the name of Christ, but offered him coca leaves and chicha beer. They painted saints with Andean faces, set them against backdrops of highland terraces, and slipped Pachamama, Mother Earth, into the corners of every altar. The festivals changed shape, but not meaning. Inti Raymi, forbidden, was kept in private, until centuries later it returned, a public celebration again, beneath the same winter solstice sun. The Inca understood cycles. They knew that even darkness turns toward light. They knew that memory, like water, finds cracks in the stone. It flows under doors, through roots, around silence. And so they waited. And while they waited, they remembered. In the highlands, families kept old quipus buried in urns, hidden behind clay pots or beneath shrines. They no longer used them to count grain or measure tribute, but they touched them. They felt the knots, like fingers on a scar. In some villages, boys were still trained to run like chaskis, even though there were no messages left to carry, only stories. In markets, women wove kompi, not with imperial colours, but with symbols only they knew. Mountain lines, serpent curves, sun steps. Each textile was a sentence in a language that had no page. And in the fields, the people planted according to the stars, even when the priest told them not to, because the moon still pulled on the potatoes. And the opus, the mountain gods, still needed feeding. You cannot erase a world built on reciprocity, not with swords, not with silence. The Incas believed in Aini, give and receive. Work together and the land will feed you. Live in balance and the world will hold. That principle outlived every emperor, even as colonial governors came and went, even as the silver mines emptied mountains and darkened lungs, even as uprisings were crushed and names changed and histories rewritten. Still, the fields turned green each spring. Still, hands passed knowledge without writing. Still, old songs were sung at the edge of festivals, sometimes in defiance, sometimes in grief, sometimes in joy, but always in breath, because the empire did not fall. It folded. It folded into stories, into traditions, into footsteps on old roads. It folded into the land itself. There are places in the Andes today where you can walk for hours without seeing a single ruin and still feel the empire beneath your soles. The way the terraces hold the mountain, the way the streams are channeled, the way the clouds gather at certain hours as if summoned. And if you ask a farmer how he knows when to plant, he may point to the stars. He may mention the guinea pig bones. He may shrug. But somewhere behind his answer is the memory of a system that understood balance. Not progress, not conquest. Balance. And when balance is broken, you rebuild. Not in gold, not in palaces, but in how you breathe. The Inca breathed with the land. And when the Spanish came, they learned to hold their breath, but not forever. Because breath, real breath, always finds its way back. It was never really over. Even as crosses rose where temples once stood, even as the breath of the empire was written over in Latin, even as the Last Supper Inca was buried without his fringe, something remained. The silence had not surrendered. It had only folded inward, and somewhere, beneath skirts woven in secret patterns, beneath songs sung to unfamiliar saints, beneath the Quechua names hidden beneath Spanish ones, rebellion waited, not the kind made with battalions or banners, but the kind born from memory. And memory does not forget betrayal. For nearly 2 centuries after the fall of Vilcabamba, the Andes wore a mask, obedient, colonized, but beneath that mask was breath. Breath that remembered Tawantinsuyu, that remembered Aini, that remembered what it meant to walk the earth with dignity, not debt. And so, eventually, the breath exhaled. His name was José Gabriel Condorcanqui, but history would remember him by another name, the name he chose for himself, Tupac Amaru II, a name that stirred even the most cautious hearts, a name that returned like thunder cracking over old stones, the name of the last Inca to be executed, the name of a son, reborn not in bloodline, but in fire. He was born in 1738, a noble, educated, Catholic, in name, but his bones remembered. His breath moved in 2 directions, one toward Spain and one toward Inti. He saw what the world had become. Indigenous peoples crushed under colonial taxes, forced labor, meter, in silver mines that hollowed both mountains and souls, languages forbidden, traditions mocked. He watched officials arrive from across the sea to bleed a land they did not know, demanding obedience from people who still dreamt of stone palaces and the golden rhythm of the sun. So he rose, not quietly, not with whispers, with declaration. 1780, he seized and executed the local Spanish corregidor, the same man who had demanded crushing taxes and forced work. Then he turned to the people and called them not subjects, but descendants. He invoked the empire, not as history, but as right. And thousands listened, from highland villages, from jungle fringes, from beneath the weight of colonial names, they emerged. Old warriors, young dreamers, mothers who remembered the songs. They marched under banners that bore both the cross and the sun, because they knew rebellion was not against the sacred, but against the forgetting of it. Tupac Amaru II did not seek mere vengeance. He demanded justice. He declared an end to the meter system. He vowed to restore dignity to the Andean people. He reached not for Cusco alone, but for the idea that the Inca had never truly fallen. For a time, the world trembled. Spanish garrisons were overrun. Colonial officials were driven from towns. Entire provinces rose up in flame and song. But rebellion is never met with silence. The colonial government struck back, not with strategy, but with terror. They captured Tupac Amaru II after months of battle, brought him to Cusco, not as a rebel, as a warning. There, in the very plaza where his namesake had been executed centuries before, he was forced to watch the death of his family, his wife, his sons, his closest allies, and then they tore him apart, literally, tied his limbs to 4 horses, each pulled in a different direction. It did not work at first. His body would not break, so they used blades. They cut, they killed. But they did not end him, because what they failed to understand, what every empire fails to understand, is that you cannot kill what does not live only in the flesh. Tupac Amaru II became Echo, a ghost not of defeat, but of return. For even as his body was broken, his name spread. It passed through villages like wind over terraces. It appeared in letters, in symbols, in dreams. It reached Argentina, Peru, Bolivia, Chile. Everywhere people remembered oppression and reached for dignity. He became more than a man. He became resonance. Centuries later, revolutionaries would whisper his name before they rose against kings. Artists would paint his face. Poets would carry his fire. Even in modern Peru, his name still stirs the air. Because he did not speak only for what was lost. He spoke for what remained. The gold was gone. The temples were shattered. The gods renamed. But the breath lived. And it remembered that once a people walked with the sun, spoke with the earth, built roads not for control, but for connection. That once they bowed not to kings, but to balance. That once rebellion did not mean chaos, it meant return. And in that return, there is always fire. Even now, in the Andes, you can feel it. In the Quechua, spoken by elders in twilight. In the songs sung over maize harvests. In the footfalls of dancers circling altars older than maps. The empire is not gone. It is breathing. In the highlands of Peru, there are roads with no signs, no mile markers, no boundaries, just stone paths wrapped around the ribs of mountains, quiet, coiled, eternal. They are not ruins, they are veins. They once carried emperors, runners, songs, tribute, and law. And now they carry silence. But silence is not absence, not here. The Inca roads, the Capac Ñan, remain, worn by time but never erased. They do not crumble, they remember. Step by step they lead through clouds and cold, past grazing llamas, past villages where Quechua still weaves through the wind. A grandmother lays potatoes on a cloth. A boy carves a reed into a flute. A farmer plants maize according to the moon's pull. These are not habits, they are remnants. No, more than remnants. They are breath, still warm, still shared. You may not see the empire, but if you listen, you can feel it beneath your feet. Each terrace on the hillside is a page of memory, each irrigation channel a line of song. Each curve in the path remembers the weight of sandals long gone. These mountains, they do not forget. They watched Pachacuti shape Cusco like a cosmos. They echoed with the footsteps of Chasqui running between tambos. They swallowed the fire of rebellion and still hold the smoke beneath their roots. And though the Spanish built new roads, named new cities, spoke new prayers, the old paths remained, used by shepherds, used by memory, used by those who never stopped believing that walking was sacred. Because for the Inca, walking was not motion, it was alignment. To walk the Capac Ñan was to harmonize with the land, to breathe as the mountains breathed, to arrive not just in place, but in purpose. Even now, the Inti Raymi returns each year, the festival of the sun, once outlawed, now celebrated. Tourists come with cameras, locals come with lineage. Dancers in feathered masks spin in the plaza at Cusco. The Sapa Inca, played by a chosen son, speaks to Inti. He raises a golden cup. He pours it onto the earth, and the people cheer. But listen closely. You'll hear something else. A lullaby in Quechua. A chant from the past, folded into the present. Not for show, for memory. It's there in the textiles too. Each color, a code. Each pattern, a story. They do not weave at random. They weave in remembrance. Some patterns mimic the stars. Others, the wings of the condor, the sacred sky guardian. Still others echo the shape of roads that no longer have names, but still have destinations. In villages like Chinchero or Ollantaytambo, you can touch the stones of houses built with the same perfection as palaces. No mortar, no gap, only fit, as if the stone chose its place. Because once, even homes were temples, and in the sacred valley, where the Urubamba River curves like a serpent through maize fields, Machu Picchu still stands, cloud-wrapped, sun-warmed, untouched by conquerors, because it hid in time, not ruined, revealed. Visitors come by the thousands, but the mountains do not blink. They've seen more than this. They know that stone is patient, that truth survives in quiet. Some say the city was a royal retreat, others a sanctuary. Still others believe it was a place of initiation, a hinge between worlds. But everyone agrees on one thing. It is aligned with the stars, with solstice, with silence. Step into the temple of the sun. Watch how the light enters at the exact moment each year. Watch how the shadow casts not just lines, but meaning. It's not just architecture, it's devotion. And in its shadow, the Andean people still walk the old ways. They speak of the Apus, the mountain spirits who see all. They offer coca leaves to Pachamama. They bury tiny ceramic bulls on rooftops for protection. Their gods never left. They just stopped shouting. Now they whisper in wind, in water, in the rhythm of hoe and seed. Even in cities, you'll find echoes. A market stall sells chicha, fermented corn beer, once offered to the sun. A taxi driver plays huayno music, melodies that remember a time when instruments were made from bone. A teacher pauses her Spanish lecture to scold a child, in Quechua. And all of it, is breath. The roads remember, the hands remember, the hills, the sky, the llama's slow blink, they remember. So when you stand on the Chapacñan, whether in sandals or hiking boots, pause, close your eyes, feel the sun on your face, the wind through the valley, the stone beneath your soles, and listen, not to sound, but to pattern. You are not walking forward. You are walking into something, a memory that never asked for permission to remain, a pulse that outlived conquest, an empire still unfolding itself in breath, because the Inca are not past, they are beneath, waiting for you to notice. Dawn in the Andes is not sudden. It begins in hush, in the slow softening of stars, in the silver hush above the ridges, in the breath of llamas rising to their feet as mist coils around terraces like ancient script. And then, the gold, not the metal kind, but the kind that touches skin before it touches stone, the kind that warms cheekbones carved by generations of wind, the kind that entered temples long before it was taken and never truly left. The sun returns, as it always has, as it always will, not just to the world, but to the soul. Because to the Inca, the sun was not only a star, it was father, order, rhythm, memory. It did not rise because of physics. It rose because people remembered to call it. Even after the empire fell, even after the roads fractured, even after the golden discs were torn from temple walls, the people kept calling, with rituals, with songs, with footsteps pressed into the kapaknyan, over and over, like prayer beads worn smooth by faith. This is the return, not of armies, not of kings, but of meaning. The Inca taught that time was circular, that the past and future were not separated by lines, but by turns, that when something was lost, it would come again, in a new form, carried by breath. And so we return again and again to what we once were, to balance, to reciprocity, to the quiet idea that we are not rulers of the world, but its children. The empire, they say, is gone. But walk through the sacred valley at daybreak and say that again. Watch the way the clouds bow to the peaks, how the women still lay coca leaves in circles before harvest, how a child lifts her face to the sun not to squint, hapaem, but to thank. They do not use the old names aloud, but the gods are still present. The apis still cradle each village. The moon still marks the planting. The rivers still speak in a language deeper than sound. And each June, when the days grow shortest, when the cold clutches the bones of every hut and every hillside, the people gather. Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun. Revived from silence, drawn out of memory, it now blooms again. Not in rebellion, but in return. On the same stones where Pachacudi once walked, a chosen figure steps forward, draped in crimson and gold. Not an emperor, not a god, but an echo. He speaks to Inti. He lifts his voice to the sky. He offers chicha to the earth. He calls the sun back, and the sun answers. It rises over Cusco, not over the cathedrals, but through them, past the domes and into the mountain air, into the eyes of the dancers, into the bellies of the drums. And for a moment, the centuries fall away. You are there, not as tourist, not as historian, but as witness to something older than conquest, older than maps, older than memory, something that simply is, a breath, a cycle, a return. You see it too in the names. Children still called Manco, Tupac, Yupanqui, not in protest, but in pride. They carry the names not like burdens, but like roots. Each syllable a map, a promise, a thread. In Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, the spirit lingers. The terraces may be cracked, the gold long gone, but the rhythm remains. In how they cook, in how they plant, in how they bury the dead facing east, toward the rising sun, always east, always beginning. Because death, too, is a return, a folding into the earth, a transformation, not an end. This the Inca understood, and this they gave to the world, not empires of steel, but empires of pattern, to walk, to build, to live in rhythm with the land, to take no more than you give, to see the sacred in silence. Even now, this is revolutionary. Even now, this is needed. And so, the Inca return, in breath, in language, in the slow, sure reweaving of identity. Scholars study the quipu again, searching for lost syntax in knots. Archaeologists uncover tambos high in the clouds. Artists sing in Quechua and set the old stories to melody. Children wear their grandparents' woven patterns proudly, and when asked where they're from, they do not say Lima or Quito. They say, I am of the sun. And the sun, steady, silent, sacred, keeps rising. Every morning, every solstice, every breath, returning not just to the Andes, but to all who remember, not with conquest, not with grandeur, but with light, the kind that warms stone, the kind that opens petals, the kind that carries memory, not like weight, but like wind. And so the empire walks again, not on golden roads, but through hearts that still beat in its rhythm. The Inca are not behind us. They are beneath us, and above, and within, in every act of balance, in every seed planted with prayer, in every step taken with reverence. The empire returns, the sun returns, and you are always part of it. The Andes are older than empire, older than language, older than even the first stories whispered beside fire. They rose not from ambition, but from pressure, slow, patient, relentless. And they remember everything. They remember the glaciers that carved their ribs. They remember the first footprints pressed into volcanic ash. They remember the hum of ceremonies carried up on smoke, the sacred blood spilled on terraces in the hush before harvest, the steady beat of drums that mimicked the heart of the land. When the Inca came, the mountains did not resist. They recognized rhythm, because the Inca did not build over the world. They built with it. They carved their roads not by flattening, but by listening. They asked where the wind flowed, where the light fell, where the soil sighed in the moonlight. They did not command the mountains. They conversed with them. And the mountains, these apus, these stone-bodied gods, still hold those conversations. Even now, if you sit in silence near a high pass and place your hand to the earth, you may feel something beneath the cold. Not movement, memory, a warmth not of fire, but of presence. The mountains remember the breath of the empire. They remember the shape of every foot that walked their roads, the weight of every offering laid upon their slopes, the tears shed beneath eclipses, the joy of planting days, the stillness of solstice mornings when all of Cusco turned east together. They remember the kings, Pachacuti, who shook the world, Tupac Yupanqui, who dreamed across oceans, Huayna Capac, who watched the empire swell like golden maize before drought. They remember the runners, the Shaski, hearts pounding, lungs sharp with altitude, carrying news, numbers, names across impossible distances. They remember the mothers, teaching songs in Quechua that carried history better than any scroll. They remember the final screams at Vilcabamba, the quiet rebellion of planting corn the old way when no one was watching. And they remember you, because to the Andes, time does not move forward. It circles, it returns. And so, when your shadow crosses an old stone path, when your breath lifts in thin air, when your eyes blur from wind and awe, you are not a visitor. You are being recognized by the silence, by the shape of things that refuse to forget. This is why people still make pilgrimages, not for spectacle, but for alignment, to step into the past not as tourist, but as thread. Each step is not toward a place, but toward a pattern. In places like Koiluriti, where thousands ascend the icy slopes each year, draped in wool and faith, singing in languages that survived fire. They do not go to see the mountain. They go to be seen by it, to show it. I remember you. I am still part of you. The mountain watches, it always has, and it does not demand perfection, only presence, only humility, to stand in its shadow and feel your bones echo the bones of those who came before, to know that your heartbeat is not only yours, it is the empire's, it is the river's, it is the earth's. When you pick up a stone in the Andes, you are not touching the past, you are being touched by it. It watches to see how you place it down again, whether you honor the weight. This is not superstition, it is relationship. The Inca lived in relationship, with stars, with soil, with breath itself, and that relationship was never severed, only quieted, only softened by time and grief. But mountains do not grieve, they endure. And through endurance they remember. So when you walk their paths, do not walk as if on top of something. Walk within it. Let the past rise to meet your feet. Let the air that touched Atahualpa's skin cool your own. Let the condor's cry remind you that sky has always carried story. And when you leave, if you leave, know this: the Andes have marked you, not with scars, but with recognition. They will not forget your footfalls, just as they did not forget the first prayers carved in Quipu, just as they did not forget the empire that lived in rhythm. And you, perhaps unknowingly, have become part of that rhythm, a thread in the cloth, a step in the dance, a breath in the endless song of stone. The Inca are not buried. They are held by sky, by silence, by mountains that still remember us. Let us speak now of what was never lost. Let us move beyond gold, beyond the broken quipu, beyond the toppled stone walls and burned prayer cloths. Let us set aside the story of conquest for a moment and listen not to the voice of history, but to the hum beneath it. It is still there. It always was. The empire of the Inca was not only an expanse of land, but an expanse of meaning. It was not defined by its kings, but by its rhythm, a breath shared between people and earth. And breath cannot be stolen. It can be silenced. It can be hidden, but it cannot be erased. It is carried in the arms of women who pass down songs like heirlooms, in the fingers of weavers who thread stories into every pattern, in the eyes of children who learn to plant by the position of stars. What was never lost is this: alignment. The Inca lived not to rule nature, but to listen to it. They watched the rivers and knew when to sow. They touched the stone and knew where to build. They watched the sky and knew when the gods were listening. This understanding, this deep wordless partnership with the world, was never burned. It lived on in the shadows, in mountain villages beyond reach. It folded itself into Catholic rituals, waiting. It buried itself in language, not to die, but to rest. Because even gods sleep, even empires dream. And now, after centuries of silence, the dream stirs again. Quechua, once banned from the mouths of children, is spoken in schools again, in songs, in literature, in parliament. Quipus, once dismissed as mere accounting tools, are studied with reverence, decoded knot by knot, revealing not just numbers, but relationships. The terraces are being restored, not for tourists, but for planting. Ancient seeds long thought extinct are returning to soil. The mountains are being named again, not with Spanish saints, but with the names they always held in winds and teeth and time. And those who walk the old roads now do not walk to conquer. They walk to remember. This is not nostalgia. This is recognition. Because something survived, something always survives. Not because it is preserved in museums, but because it is lived. The Andean farmer who blesses his corn with breath and silence. He is not reenacting. He is continuing. The old woman who sings to her loom. She is not recreating the past. She is weaving the present into place. Even the condor knows. Its wings still cast the same shadow on the same cliffs where messengers once ran, carrying breath instead of scrolls. What was never lost is the understanding that time is not a line, but a turning, that the dead are not behind us, but beneath us, around us, woven into the world like roots, and that the most sacred empires are not made of stone or gold. They are made of pattern, of balance, of offering, of listening. So the next time you see a mountain, do not ask what was once there. Ask what still is. Do not look for ruins. Look for rhythm, the rhythm of planting, of wind across terraces, of prayer murmured not for show, but for soil. And if you hear Quechua spoken, do not say it is quaint. Do not call it a relic. Know that you are hearing the language of the earth still speaking. And if you hold a piece of woven cloth in your hands, run your fingers across the pattern. Ask yourself, what does this say that cannot be written? And if your feet find a path of ancient stone, walk slowly, not out of reverence, out of recognition. The empire is not gone. It has simply become quiet. It has learned the sacred art of becoming breath. It waits in the mountain's shadow, in the gold that cannot be melted, in the stories that refuse to forget themselves, in the people who carry empire not on their backs, but in their hearts, in every offering made to Pachamama before the first furrow is cut, in every child named after a son they've never seen, but somehow remember. What was never lost is that remembering itself is resistance, that to walk in the old ways, even if they are new to you, is to rise from silence and turn again toward the light. The sun still rises over Cusco. The mountains still whisper their names. And somewhere in the quiet between two heartbeats, you may hear it. The empire, not fallen, not forgotten, but held, here, now in you. You followed the empire through time, stone by stone, name by name, breath by breath. You've walked its roads, watched its kings rise from myth and return to silence, seen its temples stripped of gold, but not of meaning. You've seen its rebellion, its remembering, its slow awakening beneath the weight of history. And now we do not end the story. We complete the circle, because the Incas never believed in endings, only in return. The Quechua word for time, Pacha, does not separate past from future. It means space, it means earth, it means everything that breathes, has breathed, and will breathe again. Time was not a straight path, but a loop, a spiral of cause and echo, of offering and response. And so too is their legacy. It does not live in museums. It lives in cycles. A woman waking before dawn to grind maize in her grandmother's stone. A boy running barefoot down a mountain trail where once the chasqui flew. An old man folding coca leaves into a neat triangle, laying them on the ground with a whisper and a nod toward the peak. The circle was never broken. It was walked, every seed planted with intention, every feast held under solstice skies, every Quechua word spoken to soothe a child. These are not cultural remnants. They are threads in an unending weave. Even the concept of kingship in Inca belief was not linear. A Sapa Inca did not simply die. He remained, mummified, yes, but also consulted, brought out for ceremonies, given chicha and warmth, because death was not a departure. It was a turn, a movement into a different rhythm. So when the last Sapa Inca was executed, the circle did not close. It simply folded inward, tighter, quieter, closer to the earth. Now, across the Andes, that folded memory begins to open again, not as empire, but as awareness, not as power, but as presence. We see it in the regeneration of terraces once abandoned, not rebuilt for spectacle, but to grow food in rhythm with the land once more. We see it in the revival of ancestral weaving patterns, not for tourists but for identity. We see it in music, in language, in architecture that bends again toward the sun instead of away from it. We see it in how the people carry memory in their daily steps, not to preserve a myth, but to live a truth. The Incas understood that knowledge was not just something kept, it was something practiced. Wisdom was not locked in books. It was walked, harvested, sung. It was in the act of reciprocity, giving to the land and trusting it to give back. That trust is what held their world together. And it is what the world now aches to remember. Because we live in lines, timelines, borders, debts, deadlines. But the Incas lived in circles. You give, you receive, you die, you return. Not because you deserve it, but because you are part of it. To them, the land was not property, it was family. The sun was not a distant fireball, it was a father. The river was not a resource, it was a teacher. And now, in a time when the world forgets how to listen, the Inca world becomes more than a past. It becomes a mirror. It asks us, what have you built in balance? What have you taken without giving? What have you named that did not want to be named? What road are you walking, and who taught you how to walk it? These are not nostalgic questions. They are sacred ones, because the circle is not closed. It moves through you too. Each time you pause in gratitude, each time you place your feet with care, each time you speak a word that was once forbidden, or notice the mountain without needing to climb it, that is walking the circle. That is the empire still breathing, not with crowns, not with conquest, but with breath, with memory, with return. You may never wear a fringe of gold, but you can offer water to the roots of a tree. You can look to the stars not for ownership, but for guidance. You can remember that time bends, that names matter, that silence can hold stories louder than any shout, and that if you ever find yourself on a stone path in the high Andes, with mist in your lungs and sun in your eyes, you are not alone. You are walking with kings and runners, with weavers and priests, with ancestors who carved meaning from stone and tucked it beneath your feet. And you do not need to know their names to be part of them. The circle never broke. It is under you now, waiting, turning, calling you not to return to the past, but to remember that the sacred was never gone, only quiet, only waiting, only breathing. There are stories we carry not in memory, but in the body. Old stories, pre-verbal, older than books, older than nation, older than loss. The Inca story lives in such a place. You may not speak Quechua. You may not trace your ancestry to Cusco. You may never have climbed the high passes or tasted chicha beneath a solstice moon. But if you breathe with care, if you walk with rhythm, if your hands know how to plant or mend or hold, you carry something. Because culture is not passed only in words. It is passed in posture, in gesture, in instinct, in the way your grandmother stirred the pot, in the lullaby you never translated, in the tilt of your head when the mountain enters your view. The empire is beneath the skin. It is in cheekbones shaped by generations of high wind, in muscles trained by the rise and fall of terraces, in knees that know how to kneel not in submission, but in offering. You see it in the way an old woman wraps a shawl around her shoulders without needing a mirror, in the fingers of a farmer who can gauge soil with a single pinch, in a child who hums a tune no one taught them, but everyone seems to know. This is not nostalgia. It is presence. The Inca world was never made to be locked in a past tense. It was always embodied. It was practiced. It was felt. The Sapa Inca was not just a ruler. He was the physical bridge between earth and sun. The Quipa Keeper was not just a scribe. He was the nerve system of the state, the weaver, the farmer, the builder. Each moved with knowledge stored not in parchment, but in bone. And long after the palaces fell, that movement continued, because oppression can cut language. It can burn books, it can melt gold, but it cannot stop a hand from knowing how to weave. It cannot stop a breath from matching the rhythm of stone. There are young dancers in Lima today who perform the old steps with sneakers and speakers, laughing between beats, but never missing one. Their bodies remember. There are elders in dusty towns who still trace the lunar calendar with their thumb on the inside of their wrist. their pulse remembers. And there are Andean immigrants far from home, in foreign cities with foreign tongues, who, walking to work, catch the scent of boiled corn, and for a moment, the breath of their great-grandmother returns to their lungs, because the body keeps the echo. Even if we cannot name the empire, it shapes how we hold the world. The Inca worldview was not about dominion. It was about placement. Not, what can I take? But, where do I belong? And belonging was not abstract. It was felt in the souls, in the stomach, in the way you moved through space. You walked to remember. You ate to honor. You built to align. Every gesture was an offering to the land, to the gods, to the cycle of being. And still, this continues. In the way a dancer begins each performance with a kiss to the earth. In the way a potter scratches old symbols into a clay bowl meant only to hold soup. In the way the heart slows at altitude, not as weakness, but as return. The body adapts. The body remembers, even when the mind is taught to forget. That is why, despite every effort to erase it, the empire survives. In gait, in gaze, in grace. You cannot conquer a hand that still knows how to shape a story in wool. You cannot silence a spine that still stands tall under the same sun. You cannot erase an empire when it lives inside the skin like a second pulse. So ask yourself, when you listen to the drum, why does your foot begin to move? When you see the shadow of a condor, why do your shoulders rise? When you step onto an old stone path, why do you slow down? It is not performance, it is recognition. You are not outside this story. You are not after it. You are inside it, woven in, knotted into the same chord, the same rhythm, the same breath. What you do with that awareness is up to you. You can walk by it, or you can walk with it, because beneath your skin, beneath all our skin, there is a road, an old one, worn smooth by devotion, etched in the shape of a circle, paved not with empire but with presence. And the moment you remember that road exists, you are already on it. Tonight, we end not with a conquest, not with a king or a ruin, but with something older, something quieter, the breath. Because long before maps were drawn, before battles, before gold, before the names that would one day fill books, there was the breath. The Inca knew this. They measured the world in rhythms, in seasons, in pulses of sun and silence. They believed that the land breathed through the river's curves, through the mountain wind, through the slow bloom of the potato flower under the moon. And so they matched it, they aligned. Not with clocks or commands, but with attention. They rose when the birds sang. They paused when the wind shifted. They planted not when told, but when invited. This was the empire's true rhythm, not expansion, not wealth, but breath. Even now, if you sit in an Andean field at dusk, you may feel it. The way the air changes, not suddenly, but like a long exhale from something very old. The hills darken, but they do not fear the night. The stones do not shift, they simply wait. And in that stillness, you begin to remember how to be. Not to strive, or explain, or prove, just to be. This too is empire. The Inca believed that being in balance with the land, with the gods, with each other, was the highest form of power. It needed no monument, only presence. So let us return to presence now. Wherever you are, whatever time this finds you, let this final rhythm be not just story, but invitation. Close your eyes. Place your hands on your chest, where the empire's breath once echoed through kings and couriers, through builders and singers, through those who never had names carved in stone, but shaped the empire all the same. Inhale slowly, and remember the mountain, not as a thing to climb, but as a teacher. Feel how it rises without hurry, how it holds without gripping, how it stays, not because it must, but because it is. Exhale, and remember the river, not as something to cross, but as something to follow. It does not resist the stones in its path. It sings around them. Let your breath do the same. Inhale, and remember the terraces, the way each level catches just enough. Not too much, not too little. The Inca never forced the land. They met it. Let your breath meet you, exactly where you are, no higher, no lower. Exhale, and feel the road, the kapak nyan, not paved with haste but with reverence. Each step set by hand, each bend shaped to terrain. The path listens as much as it leads. Breathe like that, like a path that knows where it's going because it trusts the land beneath it. You do not need to push forward. You only need to follow the rhythm that was already here. The empire did not sleep beneath steel. It rests beneath your breath. Every inhale is a return. Every exhale is an offering. You are not separate from this. You are not after it. You are within it. Because the Inca never truly asked to be remembered. They asked only to be continued. In the planting of a seed, in the shaping of a wall, in the silence between stars, in the breath between stories. So now, as this story comes to its still place, let yourself rest as they rested, with dignity, with rhythm, with trust, that tomorrow the sun will return, that the mountain will still stand, that your breath, this quiet, ancient thing, will carry what words cannot, and that somewhere, deep in the dark places of the world, the empire still listens, not for praise, not for gold, but for you, for the way your feet touch the ground, for the way your breath finds its way home, for the way you choose stillness when the world forgets how. To breathe like an empire is not to build it again. It is to remember that you are never apart from it. Not once, not ever. Now, inhale once more. Let the mountains enter your lungs, and exhale. Let the empire go where it has always gone, into rhythm, into silence, into rest. There comes a point in every story where the last word is spoken, but the meaning keeps unfolding. Where the song ends, but the sound lingers in the ribs. Where the road stops, but the feet still know how to walk. This is where we are now. The empire of the Inca. You've walked with it through gold and grief, through the rise of kings and the fall of cities, through the quiet return of memory dressed in rhythm and dust. You've stood beneath the sun they called father. You've run your fingers along walls too perfect to be called ruins. You've listened to how breath carried a kingdom, not just across land, but across time. And now the empire rests, not in defeat, in completion, not as a ruin, but as a circle drawn full. But you are still here, still breathing. And the question now is not what the empire was. It is what it gave you, what it placed in your hands while you walked beside it. Perhaps it gave you silence, not the empty kind, the full kind, the kind that speaks from stone, from water, from the space between words. Or perhaps it gave you rhythm, a reminder that there is music in repetition, in waking with the sun, in planting by the moon, in giving what you take. Perhaps it gave you reverence, not worship, but relationship, to place, to people, to what grows without needing to be seen. Or perhaps, most simply, it gave you breath, a deeper one, the kind that remembers itself even when the world forgets. Because that's what the Inca held above all else, that we are part of something larger and always have been, a road, a cycle, a breath. You see, breath was their empire's true foundation, not gold, not armies, not walls, but the breath of harmony between beings, between farmer and soil, between sun and seed, between human and sky. Every step along the Chapak Nyan was a breath. Every terrace, a breath shaped into earth. Every offering, a breath returned to origin. And tonight, as this story settles into stillness, you are invited not to remember the empire, but to become the breath that outlived it, to let its rhythm settle into your sleep, to let your pulse move in alignment with the Andes, to rest as they once rested, knowing the mountain would hold, the sun would return, and the story would continue not in ink, but in presence. Let your breath now be simple. Let it rise like morning mist. Let it fall like a condor feather. No effort, no resistance. Inhale. Feel the empire's breath enter your chest, not as history, as inheritance. Exhale. Let the grief go. Let the names go. Let the timelines and dates and endings all dissolve. What remains is the pattern, and you are within it. Now imagine the old Inca roads again, not from above, not as a map, but from within. Your bare feet on stone, the wind carrying scent of wood smoke and maize, the rhythm of breath in your ribs, the same rhythm once carried by a chasqui as he ran between worlds. You don't need to run, you only need to breathe, to be here, fully, to trust that what was sacred then can still be sacred now. Because the breath beyond empire is not political. It is personal. It belongs to every living thing. It is the wind through tall grass. It is the pause before a grandmother speaks. It is the hush over the land when the rain finally ends. It is the moment of stillness after planting, before anything grows, where everything waits in trust. This is your breath now. No temple required, no title, no name, only the knowing that you are part of it, and always were. So as you drift now, into sleep, into stillness, into the soft dark of rest, you carry the empire with you, not on your shoulders, in your lungs, a breath not tied to conquest, but to care, a breath not about power, but about presence, a breath that does not end, only moves onward, to the next step, the next hand, the next heartbeat. So let this last exhale be a beginning, a return to the circle, a soft, steady rhythm as your body lets go of holding. You are not outside the empire. You are its breath moving on, and in this stillness you are sacred. Now sleep. The sun will find you. There are places in the Andes where time bends, not backward, not forward, but inward, where mist curls along stone steps like forgotten prayers, where orchids bloom from cliff edges as if summoned by silence, where the mountains do not speak, but somehow you understand them. These are the places where the stones dream, and none more than Machu Picchu, high above the Urubamba River, wrapped in cloud, veiled in green. It waits. Discovered, or rather revealed, in the early 20th century, long after the empire's fall, Machu Picchu stands not as ruin, but as reminder, not because it is intact, but because it feels alive. The terraces, the temples, the sacred stones aligned with solstice. They are not monuments to power. They are dreams in stone, laid without mortar, carved without haste, raised with care so exact they do not erode. Theories surround this city. Was it a royal estate, a ceremonial retreat, an observatory, a school of priestesses? Or was it all these things, or something softer? A thought the empire had and kept hidden, as you keep a sacred dream beneath your pillow. What's certain is this: Machu Picchu was never found by the Spanish. It was never stripped, never burned, never forced into silence. It was protected by forgetting. And now, as you walk its paths, or even imagine them from afar, you become part of its dream. The narrow steps, the ritual stone that points to the stars, the watchtower perched on the edge of sky. They hold more than architecture. They hold memory unbroken. To stand there is to feel the breath of the empire before it was chased into shadow, to feel what the world looked like before it was renamed. To walk among those walls is not to go backward. It is to step sideways into a space between time and intention. And the stones, they do not sleep. They dream of songs once sung in the dawn mist, of hands that laid them like lullabies, of people who built not to impress, but to align. Because Machu Picchu was never about power. It was about presence. It was placed where the river curves like a snake of memory, where the stars line up not because they must, but because someone listened. The Inca believed in 3 worlds: Hanan Pacha, the upper world of gods and stars and spirit; Ke Pacha, this world, the present, the living, the breath; Uku Pacha, the inner world of roots, ancestors, silence. Machu Picchu exists where these worlds touch, where stars reflect in water, where breath becomes prayer, where the dead are not gone, only waiting beneath the moss. So when you walk there, you are not a tourist. You are a thread returning to the cloth. You are a memory the stone never let go. You are the dream walking through itself. The stone's dream of balance, of crops grown in rhythm with rain, of rituals performed with gratitude, not guilt, of rulers who saw themselves not as masters, but as mirrors of the sun. And as you breathe there, even in imagination, the dream grows clearer. You are reminded that empires can be built of other things, not of dominion, not of monuments, but of alignment. You are reminded that silence is not emptiness. It is space for the sacred to arrive. That rest is not weakness. It is where meaning regenerates. That breath is not filler. It is language older than sound. So Machu Picchu does not shout. It waits. For you, for your stillness, for your return. And when you stand on its ledge between mountain and cloud, you may feel it, that the stones are not dead. They are dreaming you back to yourself. And you remember that the Inca were never just builders. They were listeners, and these stones still listen to your footsteps, to your heartbeat, to your breath. So what will you say in silence? What will you place gently on the altar of the earth without needing to be seen? What rhythm will you carry back into your own days? Not of conquest, but of care. Because Machu Picchu does not ask you to become Inca. It asks you to remember what the Inca never forgot, that every step you take is sacred if you place it with meaning, that every breath you offer to the wind is received by something older than time, that the world is not beneath you, it is within you, that the stones dream, not of power, but of balance, and that even now the dream continues. Every time you listen, every time you rest, every time you return, not to a place, but to presence. So let the stones dream. Let the breath be soft. Let the empire unfold inside you, not to rule, but to remember. And as night wraps itself around the Andes, and the wind slips between the stone houses, and the stars begin to glow over sacred peaks, one last truth remains. The empire dreams still, and you are part of its dream. Before it was an empire of roads, before it was gold or sun temples, the Inca called their world Tawantinsuyu. 4 quarters, 4 great arms stretching out from Cusco, the navel of the world. Chinchaysuyu to the northwest, Antisuyu to the northeast, Kolasuyu to the southeast, Kuntisuyu to the southwest. Together they made not a map, but a mandala, a cosmic body, a reflection of harmony. And though time has shifted names, moved borders, and carved the world with different lines, the heart of that vision still beats. Because Tawantinsuyu was never only a place, it was a principle, a pattern for living, a way of aligning what feels divided. The Inca did not rule like an arrow. They ruled like a circle, a center with 4 limbs, each connected, each distinct, each necessary. And so too are you. You are not one direction. You are a fourfold self. You have a mind, like Chinchaisuyu, sharp, curious, seeking the coast, learning from trade, language, innovation. You have a spirit, like Antisuyu, drawn to the jungle mist, to mystery, medicine, the unseen. You have a body, like Kolasuyu, sturdy as stone, built on order, agriculture, rhythm. And you have memory, like Kuntisuyu, where the old ways live, where the roots of ritual reach deep into the earth. To be whole, the Inca knew, these quarters must not compete. They must converse. So when they built Cusco, not just as a city, but as the center, they made it in the shape of a puma, strong, silent, balanced, not an accident, a message, because Tawantinsuyu was a mirror of the cosmos, of the land, of the self. And as the empire expanded, it carried not just soldiers or rulers, but this idea that unity is not sameness. It is the sacred agreement between parts. Even the Quipu, their not language, reflected this. Multiple threads, tied in harmony, each one speaking to the others. The Andean world did not separate knowledge from the body, or wisdom from the soil, or rule from reciprocity. Everything was connected. The sun did not rise alone. It rose because the earth welcomed it. The king did not rule alone. He ruled because the people carried him. Even time was not linear. It moved like the seasons, not forward, but through. And now, as you sit here, listening to a story woven from breath and ruin and return, you may feel a pull, a tug inward, toward center. Because Tawantinsuyu lives in you, not the empire, the idea, the sacred 4-part self. Maybe you've spent too long in one quarter. Maybe your mind has ruled without letting the body speak. Maybe your memory has held too tight and your spirit longs to wander. Maybe your center feels quiet, not empty, but forgotten. The Inca left no instruction manual, only patterns. And the pattern was this: when the parts come home, the heart becomes whole. So close your eyes now. Picture yourself as a map, not flat, not rigid, but alive. The wind from Chinchaisuyu brings clarity. What do you need to know? The rivers from Antisuyu bring mystery. What do you need to trust? The terraces from Kolasuyu bring rhythm. What do you need to honor? The songs from Kuntisuyu bring memory. What do you need to remember? Let each question settle. Not to be answered, to be held. You are not here to conquer yourself. You are here to convene, to sit at the center of your own sacred cross, to breathe like Cusco, the navel, the anchor, the heart. And just as the Inca once did, to send threads outward in reverence, to gather knowledge, to receive wisdom, and to return it to center. Tawantinsuyu was not eternal. Empires rarely are. But this idea, this sacred balance, endures. It lives in every healer who listens to the land, in every teacher who honors both reason and ritual, in every builder who aligns structure with sky, in every wanderer who returns, not out of defeat, but out of love. You are the inheritor of such balance, even if the world forgets, even if borders change, even if stones fall. You remain, 4 quarters, one heart, like the sun with its rays, like the condor with its wings, like the puma with its stride. So tonight, as your body softens, as your thoughts begin to quiet, let this image settle inside you. You are not one thing. You are four, held together not by force, but by attention. You do not need to build an empire. You only need to remember how to stand at your center and breathe from there. Let the quarters speak. Let the threads return. Tawantinsuyu, not as history, as harmony, as home. You cannot speak of the Inca without speaking of the road, not because it was long, though it was. Thousands of miles, reaching from what is now Colombia to Chile. Not because it was built with mastery, though it was. Cut through rock, lifted across valleys, threaded into sky. But because the road was a living vein. It carried more than goods. It carried memory. The Chapacñan was not just a royal highway. It was the soul of the empire, moving through landscapes as if it belonged to them. The Inca did not force the road on the land. They listened. They watched how the rivers curved, how the llamas wandered, how the wind passed between peaks. And then they followed. They built with the land, not over it. They curved with mountain ridges, wove bridges from grass over breathless chasms, set stones in place with reverent precision. And always the road remembered. It remembered the chasqui, the runners who flew from village to city, carrying messages sealed in knots of quipu, each step a beat in the empire's pulse. They ran with lungs trained by altitude, feet shaped by gravel and cloud, souls carrying not just news, but connection. Each station they stopped at, each breath they took, a testament to the Inca belief that knowledge must move to stay alive. The Chapacñan was also sacred. Certain points, called huacas, were more than geography. They were places where the world thinned, where the divine could be touched. A bend in the road might be a shrine. A stone might hold spirit. A peak in the distance might echo an ancestor's face. To walk the road was not merely transit. It was pilgrimage. And it wasn't only for the powerful. Farmers used it. Priests used it. Children walked it with baskets of maize and songs on their tongues. Even now, centuries later, if you walk those same paths, you feel them breathe beneath you. Because the road was not a thing made once. It was kept, swept, tended, honored. It was lined with tambos, way stations that offered food, fire, shelter. No traveler walked alone. The road provided. It was not empty. It was alive. And in that way, it was memory made visible. Because the road did not connect just cities. It connected people. It wove the coast to the highlands to the jungle to the stars. And always it led to the center, Cusco, the navel, the breath, the pulse from which all roads spiraled. And now, as you rest, somewhere far from those winding paths, you may wonder why this matters. Why speak of a stone road built 600 years ago? Because the road was never just stone. It was intention. It was care. It was memory braided into motion. And you have your own Chapacñan within you. You have a road of memory, one that stretches back through your story, your people, your moments of joy and rupture. One that curves, that climbs, that crosses bridges made of breath and belief. You have walked it, even if you've forgotten. You felt the moments that held you, fed you, welcomed you into the next step. You've known tambos, not as buildings, but as hands, as faces, as silences that gave you rest. And you've known huacas, sacred moments that rose from nowhere, glowed for an instant, and became landmarks in your soul. So take a moment now, close your eyes, let your own Chapacñan rise before you. Not the broken sidewalk, not the train track, not the road paved in haste, the real one, the one you walk with memory, with breath, with meaning. See how it moves, how it's shaped by love, by absence, by decisions made long ago, and by those you make now. This road, your road, it remembers. Every step you've taken, every weight you've carried, every time you stopped and turned towards something better. It holds it all. You are not lost. You are woven in. And just as the Inca roads led to Cusco, not by force but by rhythm, your road leads to center, to self, to soul. You are not walking alone. Memory walks with you. And the past, when honored, is not a chain. It is a guide. It does not bind. It illuminates. The Capac Ñan was not the empire's greatest achievement. It was its greatest offering, a way to keep connection alive, to remind the world that movement and meaning can coexist. So as you drift now toward sleep, toward silence, toward the soft valley of dreams, let the road carry you. Let it rise beneath your breath. Let it remember for you, because sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is walk a path someone else once made, with care, and to place your step in theirs, not to copy, but to continue. This is how memory survives, not in books, not in monuments, but in footsteps, yours. Tonight the road remembers, and so do you. In the Western world, to write was to etch letters across paper or stone. But in the Andes, meaning moved through threads. Not lines, but lines braided. Not sentences, but strands tied with care. This was the quipu, a system of chords and knots, each one a syllable of something sacred. To outsiders, it looked like a tangle. Colored strings, hanging loops. But to the Inca, this was a library, a map, a breath made visible. Each chord had a purpose, each color a story, each knot, tied high or low, loose or tight, was a number, a name, an echo of truth. They say the quipu recorded harvests, tracked taxes, counted armies. Yes, it did all that. But the elders knew better. The quipu kamayuk, keepers of the knots, knew that some quipus did more than measure. They remembered weddings, deaths, offerings, visions. Some quipus whispered prayers through their weave. Some held the names of ancestors who had no tomb. To read a quipu was not to scan a code. It was to listen, to hold it between your fingers, to feel the weight of the knots, to know that someone else long ago had touched this same thread and breathed meaning into it. It was a conversation, not with a voice, but with intention. And this was the genius of the Inca. They trusted that not all language must be spoken, that silence too can carry wisdom, that the space between knots is just as vital as the knots themselves. It's easy to miss the sacred when it's made of string. But think of what you tie in your own life. A bracelet from childhood, a ribbon in a drawer, a shoelace knotted by a parent's hand. We know, even now, that touch can carry meaning. The Inca took that knowing and made it a system, a memory not written, but woven. Imagine the hands of the keeper, calloused, sure, moving through chords with the grace of ritual. No ink, no noise, just the breath of their lungs and the soft click of fibers tightening. Now imagine the traveler days from Cusco, carrying a message not spoken, but wrapped into a bundle of knots. They hand it over, no scroll, no seal, only the thread and trust, because to read a quipu was to feel it. Each loop told a story. Each color was a mood, each grouping, a memory with weight and order. The Spanish, when they came, burned many, quipus, not out of malice only, but out of fear. They could not read them, and in their world, what cannot be read must be erased. But the threads did not vanish. Some were hidden, some passed hand to hand, some buried in cloth beside the dead, and some remained waiting. Even now, archaeologists find them, hung in silence, waiting to be remembered. We've begun, slowly, to relearn their language, to map the mathematics, to trace the poetry. But the truest understanding does not come from decoding. It comes from respecting the mystery, because not everything must be understood to be honored. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson of the quipu. That memory is not always loud, that not every story needs a voice, that some truths live best in fingers, in knots, in quiet. And you have your own quipus, not made of thread, but of moments, knots of grief you still carry, knots of joy that held you together, knots of choices, pulled tight, then slowly loosened. Your life is not written in paragraphs, it is woven. And sometimes, to remember who you are, you don't need to read. You only need to feel, to run your hands along the threads, to sit in stillness with the silence between, to trust that what you've lived has shape, has meaning, has memory, even if no one else can see it, even if it's not spoken aloud. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to soften, imagine a thread in your hand. Feel its weight, feel the knots. Let one be a memory of love, another of loss, another of change. Let each knot remind you that your life has been recorded in the way that matters most, not for others, but for you. The quipu was never meant to last forever. It was meant to be passed, to be held, to be remembered, like breath, like song, like the road behind you. And as you close your eyes, know this: you are part of that legacy. A life lived not only in words, but in threads, soft, sacred, enduring. The language of not speaks still, and in your sleep, you may just remember what it's been saying all along. Long before the Spaniards sailed, long before even the first stone of Cusco kissed the earth, the sky was already sovereign. The Inca rose beneath it, not apart from it. They looked up, not for conquest, but for order, for meaning, for breath that did not end at the lungs. Their empire, though vast and disciplined, did not begin in law. It began in myth, in reverence, and at the center of all things, shining, watching, warming, was Inti, the sun god, father of the royal line, watcher of time, giver of growth and gold. His light wasn't just physical, it was political, it was personal. Every Sapa Inca, the emperor, was his son, not by metaphor, by blood, or so they believed. And in that belief, they found legitimacy, unity, destiny. To doubt the Inca king was to doubt the sun. But Inti was not alone in the heavens. Before even he glowed, there was Viracocha, the great creator, he who walked across the sea, who shaped the world from water and void, who gave the first humans form, then vanished, not in cruelty, but in mystery. Viracocha was not loud. He did not demand temples of gold. He left no thunder in his wake. But he was everywhere, in fog, in silence, in the question that comes before all others: why are we here? He gave the world its shape, and then quietly trusted it to unfold. But the Inca were not only children of sky, they were born of earth, and for that they gave worship to Pachamama, the Earth Mother, not as a figure beneath, but as a being that held all things. She was not distant, she was soil beneath fingernails, she was corn ripening in the wind, she was the heartbeat of valleys. Every offering, a coca leaf, a sip of chicha, a drop of blood, was given to her, not in fear, in thanksgiving, because to eat from the land is to owe her a song. Even now, in the Andes, farmers pause before planting. They bow. They murmur words to the soil, not tradition, relationship. Pachamama is not gone. She never was. The Inca, though skilled in war, knew that reverence was the first wisdom. Their priests watched stars like a sacred calendar. Their astronomers marked solstice and equinox with stone towers aligned to dawn. They knew that time was not a line, but a circle, that the gods did not live above, but within, in rivers, in animals, in fire, even in stone. Some rocks were alive to them, huacas, sacred places where spirit dwelled, not idols, not decorations, presences. You could pass a huaca and feel it breathe. You could sit beside one in grief and find it knew your sorrow. This was the empire's deepest structure, not its walls, but its faith in presence. The divine was not separate. It walked the roads. It stirred in the clouds. It answered not with words, but with weather, and the people understood. They did not pray only with mouths. They prayed with feet, with hands, with how they grew their maize and how they buried their dead. Everything, from irrigation to ceremony, was shaped by cosmic logic. Even the chicana, the Andean cross, symbolized connection. Above and below, past and future, self and community. To be Inca was to live between light and shadow, between sky and soil, between gods who created and gods who remained. And in that in-between, they found not confusion, but peace. A peace born of knowing that the world had meaning even in mystery, and that they were not at its center, but its caretakers. Now, as you lie here, far from Cusco, far from altars and condors, you may still feel it, that quiet sense that something watches kindly, that breath is more than air, that meaning does not need proof, only presence. You don't need to name your gods tonight, only to feel the sacred press gently at the edges of your sleep, perhaps in the hush before dreams, perhaps in the warmth behind your ribs. Let Inti rise behind your eyes, not as blinding fire, but as gentle memory. Let Viracocha walk through your thoughts, silent, ungraspable, but kind. Let Pachamama curl beneath you, soft, steady, eternal. You are not floating. You are held by stories older than empire, by silence deeper than myth, by gods who do not demand but accompany. And so, as your breath slows, as your body begins to drift, you carry their empire with you. Not in your hands, in your attention, a reverent listening, a sacred rest. Sleep now, with the sun at your shoulder, the earth at your spine, and the mystery of the divine woven gently through your bones. You are not alone in the dark. The gods are still walking. Cusco means navel, not a metaphor, a declaration. To the Inca, Cusco was the center, not only of land, but of the world's meaning, and at its center, like the heart of a heart, stood Coricancha, the temple of the sun. Curicancha, they whispered. Golden courtyard. But it was not merely gold that made it sacred. It was the way the light moved through it. How dawn was not just a beginning, but a blessing. Every stone was set with reverence. Every angle knew where the sun would stand on solstice and equinox. Every wall caught the light in just the right silence. This was not architecture, it was alignment. Coricancha was the spine of belief, a place where gods came close, not to be worshipped in separation, but to merge with the world. There were no statues of Inti, no faces carved into altars, because light itself was the face, and the sun, each morning, stepped gently into the temple, just as the Inca hoped he would. The walls once shimmered with gold plates, not decoration, but invocation. A mirror for Inti's gaze, a reminder that the divine was not absent. It was here, present, brilliant. And beyond the gold, there were gardens, where plants of maize and cocoa were crafted not from soil and water, but from precious metal, golden stalks, silver leaves, rows upon rows. They did not grow, they glowed. offerings made not to impress, but to reflect, to remind the sun what it gives. And within the temple, each room honored a god, the moon, the stars, thunder, rain, and rainbow. Each a chamber of silence, each aligned with breath and sky. To walk through Coricancha was not to move through space. It was to pass through cosmic stations. The temple did not tell stories. It revealed presence. Here, the line between human and divine was not thick. It was thin as dawn light. The Sapa Inca would sit in Coricancha, a golden mask behind him, sunlight falling on his chest, and the people would not see a man. They would see Inti's echo, not illusion, not trick, a reminder that the divine does not reside above, but within the pattern. That light is not just heat, but voice. Even the architecture told time. Windows placed to catch the year's first light, last warmth, midday blaze. Time did not tick in Coricancha. It glowed. And when the Spanish came, they were blinded, not by belief, but by brightness. They stripped the walls, melted the gold, built a cathedral atop the stones, but the stones remained, perfectly joined, cut so fine not even a blade could pass between. Because the Inca did not build with mortar, they built with understanding. They knew the earth moved, so their stones did too. They leaned, absorbed shock, whispered together. Even now, the old walls of Coricancha stand strong, while later buildings crack. What remains is not gold. It is wisdom in stone. And if you go there now, walk slowly. Let your fingers graze the stone. Feel how it is not cold, how it hums, softly, like something remembering light. Let your eyes trace the angles, the openings, the way the sky still fits. It is not ruined. It is remembering. And in that remembering, you begin to understand something larger. The center of the world was never just a point on a map. It was an invitation to live in alignment, to treat the ordinary, light, shadow, silence, as sacred again. The Inca did not fear time. They shaped themselves around it. They did not conquer the sun. They listened to it, welcomed it, offered thanks with every beam. And perhaps this is the quiet legacy of Coricancha. Not the gold, not the power, but the belief that if you build your life in tune with the sacred will enter. Not loudly, not with thunder, but as a thread of morning slipping through stone. As you rest now in your own space, lightless or lit, let the temple rise in your mind. Not the walls, the alignment. Let your thoughts settle into symmetry. Let your breath join the rhythm of stars. You do not need to build a temple. You only need to remember that the center is still with you, where your breath meets your body, where stillness meets memory, where the light someday will return. You are not far from the sacred. You are within it. And Coricancha, though stripped, buried, renamed, has never been destroyed. It stands in your mind, your marrow, your moments of quiet listening. The golden light, though stolen, still echoes. And tonight, it falls again, not on stone, but softly on you. The fall of an empire does not arrive with a single scream. It comes like frost, silent in the dark, cracking what once seemed unbreakable. The Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, the land of 4 quarters, was vast. Vast like mountains that never imagined absence. And yet it fell, not because it was weak, but because the world shifted beneath it like a plate of stone, unexpected, unforgiving. When the Spaniards came, they came with steel, with fire, with unfamiliar gods who demanded kneeling. But the fall began before they came, not with swords, with fractures. 2 brothers, 1 throne, Huascar and Atahualpa, sons of the same line, divided by ambition. Their civil war was a tearing of spirit, a wound not just in blood, but in unity. And when the Spaniards arrived, they stepped not into a fortress, but into a family undone. They saw opportunity in the cracks. Francisco Pizarro did not conquer with armies. He conquered with timing, with cunning, with a handful of men and the illusion of power backed by guns and fear. When Atahualpa was captured at Cajamarca, the world tilted. He offered gold, rooms of it, not as bribe, but as belief. Surely the invaders valued what gleamed. They did, and still they killed him, strangled. Royal blood silenced in dust, and with his last breath, the thread began to fray. The empire unraveled not like a cloak torn in rage, but like a loom left unattended. Each strand slackening, temples stripped, priests exiled, sacred roads now marched by boots that did not know the names of rivers or stones. The sun was no longer sovereign. A cross was nailed above Coricancha, not gently, not with reverence. And yet, the bones remained. They always do. Even when the flesh of empire is burned away, its structure survives. In terraces still holding the hills, in walls that did not fall when the earth did, in words whispered when no Spanish ear could hear. Language survived, in Quechua lullabies, in stories passed beside fire, in names that refused to be erased. The invaders thought they had conquered. But conquest is never total. Not when memory lives in the soil, in the breath, in the patterns of weaving. The bones held on. Women still planted as their mothers had. Men still looked to the stars even when told to look away. And in the quiet, the old gods watched, not defeated, only waiting, because the sacred does not die when its statues are shattered. It hides, in shadow, in silence, in the space between breaths. So tonight, as you lie here, know this. Fall is not the end. It is the turning. The Inca Empire collapsed, yes, but its fall became root. Its silence became soil. And from that soil, something else would grow. Not the same, not imperial, but enduring. You see it now in the patterns of cloth, in the way potatoes are grown with ceremony, not speed, in how the Quechua tongue still sings at sunrise on mountains the world forgot to name. The Spaniards wrote their histories, big loud books full of kings and conquests. But the real story, it lived in the bones, in the curve of an old woman's back as she bends to the earth, in the thread pulled through a loom with hands that remember, in a song hummed to a child who does not yet know how much was almost lost. Empires fall, they always do, but meaning does not. Meaning lingers, in ruins, in rhythms, in bones. Even now, if you go to Sacsayhuaman, just above Cusco, you'll see stones so large, so precise. They laugh at the idea of ruin. They were not built to impress. They were built to last. And they have. Because stone, like memory, does not ask permission. It simply waits. Tonight, let yourself become stone. Not cold, but enduring. Let your worries pass over you like the wind. Let your breath carve you, softly, into something older than fear. You are not the fall. You are the bone that remembers, the part of the story that holds its shape even after silence. The Inca knew that death was not final, that spirit does not vanish, it shifts, and perhaps their fall was not a disappearance, but a transformation. An empire turned inward, from flags and borders to memory and breath. You carry it now, in your listening, in your stillness, in how you honor the fallen not with mourning, but with presence. This is how we remember, not with noise, but with quiet continuity. Let that be enough. Let the bones hold you, steady, through the long night. And when the light returns, as it always does, you will rise not as one who forgot, but as one who remembers. If you want to know where the Inca went, go to the highlands at sunrise. Not the cities, not the dusty roads where cars now hum. Go higher, where the air thins and the sky feels close enough to press against your chest. There, in the folds of the Andes, you will see the children of the empire, not in ruins, in rhythm. You will see women with bright skirts that rustle like wind through corn. You will see men coaxing potatoes from the soil with the same hands their fathers used. And you will hear Quechua, not in classrooms, but in laughter, in scoldings, in lullabies. The language is not dead. It was never even quiet. It just shifted its weight from temple to tongue. It lives in the way a grandmother tells a story, not as performance, but as memory dressed in metaphor. It lives in weaving, where patterns are not just beautiful, but spoken. Each design holds a meaning, a village, a lineage, a promise. The warp and weft are not fabric, they are scriptures. Some speak of llamas, others of mountain spirits. Some mark the passing of a loved one, others the shape of a sacred constellation. This is how history survives, not in books bound with leather, but in blankets wrapped around babies. And in the fields, the fields. The Inca once grew hundreds of varieties of potato, each suited to an altitude, a sun angle, a breath of mist. Today, those potatoes still bloom under the same sun, with the same names, planted in curves that follow the shape of the earth's sigh. The children of the Andes do not claim crowns, but they remember, in festivals, in songs, in dances that echo rituals once offered to gods whose names still linger in wind. They build with stone. They harvest with rhythm. They bury their dead not with forgetting, but with food and fire. And always they look to the mountains, not for guidance, for witness. The mountains have watched everything, and so they are spoken to, thanked, feared, loved. This reverence is not superstition, it is relationship. The mountain gives water, the mountain gives shelter. The mountain, if angered, gives nothing. The Inca knew this. The children of the Andes still do. Even in change, they remember. Even in plastic and radio towers and roads that snake where no roads once dared, they remember. A boy in rubber sandals might still carry coca leaves to an elder's altar. A girl in a hoodie might still pause before a huaca, a stone shaped by wind and time, and whisper a wish. This is not nostalgia, it is continuity, because empire is one thing, but presence, true, living presence, is another. The Inca may have fallen, but their breath did not. It passed down through silence, through the lines of the hand, through the water saved in a gourd for a traveller who didn't ask. There is no monument tall enough to honour a people who still carry the sun in their bones. So the children of the Andes do not build them. They build fires. They build families. They build paths that are not paved, but known. And in those paths, the old stories walk with them. The child who gathers firewood also gathers memory. The woman who kneels by the river knows what her grandmother sang to the water spirit. This is how the empire remains, not by power, but by participation. Each act, planting, weaving, singing, is not performance. It is partaking of something older, something vast, of Tawantinsuyu, still breathing in the ridges of the land, of Inti still warming the fields, of Pachamama still asking for respect, and of the people still answering. You may not see them on maps, you may not hear them in history books, but the children of the Andes are still rising, not to reclaim a throne, but to reclaim meaning, to remind the world that time does not always flow forward. Sometimes it circles, that identity is not declared, it is lived, quietly, steadily, daily. The Inca were once the mightiest in the land. Now their descendants are not mighty, they are rooted. And perhaps that is stronger, because what roots cannot be torn, what listens cannot be erased, what sings will always echo. Tonight, as you rest, know that the empire has not vanished. It has softened, it has simmered, it has settled into bodies and breath, and the way a child in Peru looks at the sun and does not flinch, for he has seen it before, in stories, in mirrors, in the fire his mother lights to cook potatoes from a soil that remembers. Sleep now, not in the shadow of the empire, but in the warmth of what endures beyond it. The children of the Andes are still walking, and the mountains, as always, are watching. The final step is not the fall, it is the echo. What endures after a voice has faded, what glows after the fire burns low, what light remains when no one is left to name it. The Inca knew this, they trusted it. Their empire was built of more than mortar and gold. It was built of cycles, sun and seed, breath and mountain, rise and return. They did not cling to the illusion of permanence. They built with time, not against it. The sun itself was their god, not because it ruled, but because it returned. Every morning, every season, every harvest. Even now, as you close your eyes, that same sun touches the same hills, the same valleys, the same terraces carved by hands long since turned to dust, and yet not gone, because memory, when carried in rhythm, cannot be erased. It becomes breath, it becomes gesture, it becomes the way an old woman folds her shawl when the wind shifts at dusk. The echo of the Inca is not in ruins, it is in return. A boy walks a highland trail. He hums a song his grandfather whistled. He does not know where it began, only that it feels right. That is the echo. A woman weaves a story into thread, not to sell, to remember. Each color is a direction, each knot a name. That is the echo. A shepherd kneels beside a stone smoothed by centuries of snow. He presses his forehead to it, says nothing. That is the echo. And it moves beyond the Andes now. It has drifted on winds, in stories, in the eyes of travelers who did not expect to cry when they stepped inside an old ruin and felt something. Not sadness, not awe, recognition. The echo of the sun is not loud. It does not demand. It waits. It lingers in how the morning light bends over Machu Picchu, not to illuminate, but to join, to remind that the sacred was never in the height of empire, but in the way it was lived, carefully, closely, in reverence. The Inca knew how to touch the earth without wounding it, how to honor the sky without conquering it, and how to plant meaning that would outlast any crown. That, too, is empire, not the kind that appears in textbooks, but the kind that appears in dreams, in silence, in song, in the warmth that rises in your chest when you hear a flute play notes older than language. This, then, is what remains. Not the conquest, not the collapse, but the continuity. The way stone remembers where the sun lands. The way rivers still follow ancient paths. The way a people can be scattered, but not broken, because you cannot shatter something that was built to echo. And so, the Inca do not return in armies. They return in moments, in the hush of morning fog, in the weight of a woven blanket, in the hush between footsteps on a trail that leads upward, always upward, toward a sky full of ancestors. Even the gods have quieted, but their breath is still in the clouds. Pachamama still listens. She does not speak in thunder, she speaks in harvests. Inti still watches. He does not roar, he glows. And you who have traveled this far, you carry the echo now, not as burden, as blessing, for you have heard it, in the folds of these stories, in the rise and fall of a people who did not need to be remembered to be present. You have felt it, in the slowness, in the breath. You have walked beside the empire not as witness, but as participant. And now the sun rises for you, not just over ruins, but within. You carry the echo forward, in how you move through the world, in how you treat the sacred, in how you pause just once to feel the warmth on your face and think, this too is the center of the world. So sleep now, not in darkness, but in light, not in forgetting, but in knowing that the empire may have quieted, but its story still stirs in every dawn and every hand that remembers how to give thanks. The echo of the sun is not gone. It simply waits to be heard in stillness. And now you have heard it. The road does not speak in words. It speaks in rhythm. Stone after stone, set by hands that shape the mountain without cutting its skin. The Chapak Nyan, the royal road, was not merely a route. It was a ritual, a spine of empire stretching from the lush valleys of Colombia to the southern glaciers of Chile, threading together coast and jungle, desert and snow, as if sewing the world into one garment. And every footstep placed upon it was a stitch of memory. The Inca did not build it to explore. They built it to connect, to carry potatoes and gold, but also language, lore, story, song. Messengers, the Shaski, ran these roads with the urgency of thunder, carrying not just words, but breath. Each step was a heartbeat of the empire. Each stride echoed across mountains in time with the sun's arc. And yet it was not conquest that defined this path. It was care. Every 10 miles, a tambo, a way station, offered rest, water, shelter. Even the runners were honored with shoes of woven fiber, carried not for comfort, but for grace. To tread lightly on land that was never theirs, only borrowed. And even now, long after the empire has fallen, the road remains, in fragments, in scars, in sacred lines, still winding through high passes, still clinging to cliffs, still sleeping beneath moss and the shadow of llamas, still listening. You may walk there today, on trails where no tires roll, where no concrete has paved forgetfulness. And if you are quiet, you will feel it. Not in the stone, in your body. Your breath will change, your step will slow. Something ancient will rise in your souls, because the road remembers. It remembers presence. It was never meant to be a highway, a line between here and there. It was meant to be a mirror. Each step reflects you back to yourself. Each rise, each bend, each stone asks gently, who are you when you are not hurrying? When you carry only what you need? When you walk not to arrive, but to belong? And perhaps that is what the Inca understood best, that a road is not just for commerce or command. It is for communion, with land, with sky, with silence. The Chapak Nyan was not made only by engineers. It was shaped by cosmology, by respect. Its curves followed stars. Its markers aligned with solstices. Its breath matched the mountain's own. This is not metaphor. This is geometry married to reverence. And it is why, even now, a hiker may stop on a ledge, look out across the Andes, and feel the echo of thousands who stood there before. Not to conquer, to see, to witness the world from the edge of sky. The road still speaks, but only to those who walk with listening feet. Not loudly, softly. It says, I am not just where you go. I am how you go. I am not just what you travel. I am what travels through you. I am the empire still breathing beneath your souls. I am the song still echoing between your ribs. I am the way back, to center, to slowness, to meaning. Tonight, as you lie still, know this. You have walked that road, in story, in spirit. You have felt the sun on your back and the weight of altitude in your breath. You have heard the whisper of stone beneath your modern pace. And somewhere, in the folds of that ancient map, the road has marked your passing, not with ink, with memory, because the road does not forget. It remembers every offering dropped, every foot that stumbled, every child who ran barefoot and laughing, chased by clouds and wind. You are now part of it, not because you claimed it, because you joined it. And that is all the Inca ever asked of those who walked their paths. Not obedience, but respect, not worship, but wonder. So rest now as if beneath a tambo roof, with stars as your sentinels and stone as your cradle. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the road. Let your dreams follow its curves. Let the silence between steps become the space where meaning grows. You are still walking, even now, in memory, in myth, in the quiet echo of stone that still knows your name. The road continues, and so do you. When the empire fell, so too did its gods, not in flame or fury, but in silence. The temples were stripped, their altars torn down. The statues, gold and perfect, melted into coins, into crowns, into strangers' hands. But the gods did not scream. They did not strike back. They watched, as if they knew that worship changes, but divinity remains. And perhaps they understood what the invaders never could, that gods do not live in gold. They live in remembrance, in the way a hand folds in prayer, in the way an offering is left by a river, not because of ritual, but because of need. Inca religion was not a thing of fear. It was a conversation, a dialogue with the earth, with the sky, with the fire that gave life and the water that carried it away. Inti, the sun, was not distant. He was a father, a warmth on the shoulder in a cold season. Pachamama, the earth, was not soil. She was mother, a womb and a warning, a giver and a taker. The gods were not myth. They were relationship. And when that relationship was broken, when crosses were nailed above the old shrines, when festivals were outlawed and prayers rewritten, it did not kill the divine. It only changed the language. You see it even now, in the way a farmer plants with a glance to the sky, not just for rain, but for permission, in the way a mother teaches her child to speak softly near a mountain, in the way a stone is left, small and round, at a bend in the trail, a quiet offering to the Apu, the spirit of the peak. The gods, it seems, never needed temples. They needed attention, and when the world stopped naming them aloud, they did not die. They became the shape of the land. They became the curve of the hillside, the call of a bird at dusk, the silence between lightning and thunder. And slowly, reverence returned, not as doctrine, as gesture, a hand over the heart before drinking from a spring, a whisper to the wind before crossing a pass. The rituals did not vanish. They hid. They cloaked themselves in Catholic robes, in saints' names and Sunday hymns. But beneath them, the old stories still breathed. Corpus Christi, a Christian feast, still walks with dancers whose steps follow the old rhythms. The Virgin of Candelaria rides in a parade that pulses with the heartbeat of Pachamama herself. Two worlds, layered, not erased. Two truths, woven. This is the Inca way, not to deny, to include. Their pantheon was not jealous, it was generous. There was space for the sun and the stars, the river and the flame, the father and the mother, the jaguar and the condor. Each god a thread in the great tapestry of being, and that tapestry, though weathered, is not torn. It still catches the light in certain places. A festival in Cusco, a grave dug with song, a child anointed with water and the whisper of Inti's name, though no one admits it. These are the gods, still walking beside us, not demanding, accompanying, because the divine does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, in silence, in shadow, in soil, and sometimes it is the quiet that makes it holy. When the gods fell silent, they did not abandon. They transformed, from statue to stone, from gold to memory, from priest to grandmother, and in that transformation they grew stronger. For what is remembered in silence can never be taken by force. What is loved in secret cannot be erased. And so tonight, if you close your eyes and listen, not with your ears, but with your breath, you might hear them, not as words, as presence, as the hush that falls just before the rain, as the warmth that touches your cheek through a break in the clouds, as the way your heart slows when you touch bare earth. They are still here, in the patterns of shadow on an ancient wall, in the way stars align over the sacred valley, in the silence between names. You do not need to believe, only to feel. The Inca knew that gods lived best not in certainty, but in attention. So let your attention return to the mountain, to the wind, to the hush before sleep. Let it be a prayer, even if you do not call it that. Let it be a homecoming, even if you never left. And as you drift, know this: the gods are not gone. They are simply quiet, waiting, as mountains do, for the sun to rise again. And it always does. There are histories that fade when the ink runs dry. And then there are those stitched into silence. The Inca left no scrolls, no books filled with neat linear tales. Their stories were made of fiber, spun from alpaca wool, dyed in the blood of cochineal, washed in river stones. A garment was not decoration, it was declaration. A cloak was not just warmth, it was record. Every thread held intention, every color a meaning, every pattern a map of lineage, of place, of sacred time. And long after the Spaniards took the gold and burned the temples, they could not unweave what was already woven. Because textiles lived on the body, they passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, weaver to watcher. The quipu, that strange bundle of knotted cords, was a language the conquerors could not read, still cannot, not fully. But the Quechua never needed letters. They had memory, bound in wool and wrapped in ceremony. A single tunic might carry the number of flocks in a valley, the festivals of a calendar year, the name of a warrior long gone, but not in words, in weft. It is a kind of magic that the thread could hold such weight, not only physical, but emotional, ancestral, divine. To touch an old Inca textile is to touch time itself, time that still breathes. And the women, always the women, have kept the rhythm, even when the empire fell, even when their language was outlawed, even when foreign hands dictated what they could wear, what they could speak, what they could remember. The women still wove, in quiet corners, in valleys untouched by cities, in rooms where light fell through reed shutters and babies slept beside the loom. They wove stories they could not say aloud. They stitched grief into shawls. They laced prayers into belts. And still they do. You will see them even now. In the highlands of Peru, where the air smells of sweet maize and dust, a woman bends over her loom. Her hands know no hesitation. Thread passes through thread, tight and sure like heartbeat. She does not look up. She listens to the warp, to the voice in the fabric that tells her, here is your village, here is your mountain, here is your mother's breath woven into yours. This is how memory survives, not because it is loud, because it is tended, because someone wakes before the sun to soak yarn in marigold until it carries the warmth of 1,000 dawns, because someone still knows that red comes from cochineal, That indigo must be coaxed slowly, that certain patterns must only be woven under certain stars, because the story is not just told, it is worn, on the shoulders of girls who fetch water, on the hips of dancers who twirl under festival skies, on the backs of grandmothers who walk the same trail their ancestors walked with offerings in their shawls. And those patterns, they are not for decoration. They are boundaries, they are bridges, they are names without letters. Some tell where a weaver is from. Some tell what her family once guarded. Some tell of grief, a lost child, a failed harvest. Some are joy, not painted across canvas, but lived. Thread by thread, the Inca memory continues. No king commands it now, no priest oversees it. Only the hands of women bent like mountain grasses, sure as rivers, soft as the dusk light that settles on old stones. And here's the wonder, the thread does not forget, even when taken far from home, even when hung in museums or buried in graves or lost for years beneath dust. When it is found, it remembers. We see now what the empire left us, not gold, but thread. And thread does what gold never can. It bends, it wraps, it warms. It moves from one body to another and never breaks. You may not speak Quechua. You may never walk the Andes. But if you run your hand across an Inca textile, or even the modern echoes of it, something in you will pause. You will feel the rhythm. And in that pause, you will join the lineage. Not as ruler, not as scholar, as witness, because that is what the thread asks, not to be deciphered, but to be honored, not to be explained, but held. And maybe tonight, as you settle beneath your own blanket, one with no symbols, no sacred dyes, you'll remember, even now, you are wrapped in time, not in empire, but in gesture, because we all weave, every choice a stitch, every word a pattern. And the quiet ones, the ones passed down in silence, are often the strongest. Sleep now, as if held in cloth dyed by the sun. Let memory fold around you. Let meaning settle in layers unreadable, but deeply felt. You are part of a tapestry, even if you don't see the threads, even if you didn't know you were woven in. The story continues, and the thread, as always, endures. You have seen the stones, you have followed the roads, you have heard the gods in silence and found time stitched into thread. And now, look closer. The Inca are not gone. They walk beside you, past you, sometimes within you, not in the form of golden thrones or armies of runners, not in chants of empire or banners flapping against high passes. They walk in humbler ways, in the tilt of a woman's head as she gathers maize beneath a sky that remembers Inti's name, in the way a boy balances a bundle against the weight of wind, feet sure on a trail his ancestors once shaped stone by living stone, in a grandmother's whispered words before breaking bread, not loud, not for show, but for connection. The empire lives on, not in conquest, in continuity. The last empire is not behind us. It walks with us, beside rivers, under stars, through language that survived exile, through music that remembers the weight of mountains. You see, the Inca never truly ruled with swords. They ruled with rhythm, with the certainty of seed to harvest, of sun to shadow, of ancestor to child. Their governance was not empire in the Roman sense. It was ecosystem. To be Inca was to belong, to place, to people, to purpose. And that sense of belonging did not vanish with the Spanish. It adapted. It wove itself beneath the New World, threading through time like a river under stone. Even when the names changed, the rhythm endured. A rhythm that moves slowly, with breath and burden, with stories passed by mouth and foot. Listen for it, It's in the lull of Quechua words still spoken in markets and kitchens, in lullabies sung under straw-thatched roofs, in festivals that flicker with the old meanings even as modern masks dance. These are not performances, they are inheritances. And the empire, though unnamed, is still inhabited, not by rulers, but by keepers. Keepers of fire, of fibre, of fields that remember how to yield only when asked kindly. The empire walks in grandfathers who mark solstice by shadow, in children who learn to braid thread with their grandmother's hands, in priests who kneel before Christ, but still nod to Pachamama before planting. This is not contradiction, it is continuity, a weaving, not a breaking, a memory, not a monument. And what could be more Inca than that? For even their cities were not built to dominate. Machu Picchu does not shout, it listens, it humbles, stone fitted to mountain, walls that lean with the wind, temples that drink light at the right hour. This is what lasts, not domination, design with reverence. And when you walk those sacred places now, the stones do not care who you are. They ask how you step, whether your foot respects the earth, whether your breath matches the pace of the past. Because the empire is not in ruins, it is in your attention, in how you see. And the Inca, they are not waiting to return. They are already here. They sell fruit in the shade of old walls. They mend shoes beside sacred rivers. They herd alpacas across paths older than the wheel. They live in the heartbeat of the Andes, in the rhythm of planting and rain, and in a world that often forgets how to move slowly, how to live in cycles, how to honor enough. They carry something precious, not a past, a presence, and it is not dying, it is growing, in quiet ways, in high places, where the air is thin, but meaning is thick. You may not see them at first. You may not recognize the empire if you look for crowns and conquest. But if you feel your breath slow, if your body adjusts to the altitude of memory, if your spirit quiets, you will begin to see this empire walks, and you walk with it. Each respectful step is a vote, each remembered name a thread, each pause to listen a prayer, not to resurrect the past, but to join it, to let its wisdom shape the present, to remember that empires need not end in silence. They can hum beneath the surface, carried by those who never stopped singing. So tonight, rest your head on earth that once held empires. Let the footsteps of the Inca gather beneath your dreams. Let them lead you, not backward, but inward, to a place where time is circular and meaning is carried, not lost. The last empire still walks, and now so do you. The story quiets now. The roads have wound their last turn. The gold has dulled beneath the weight of centuries, and the voices of kings and conquerors have faded into the hush of mountain wind. But something remains, something soft, something rising. It is not a monument, not a name, not even a memory. It is breath, the same breath that once steamed from the mouths of builders at dawn, that whispered through coca leaves on high ridges, that rose in prayer beneath the solstice sun, the breath that carried messages from one end of the empire to the other, swift as footfalls on the Capacñan, the breath that rose in grief when gods were toppled, and in quiet defiance when grandmothers taught forgotten songs to children in secret. This breath, it still rises, not in triumph, in continuity. Every morning in the Andes, when light spills over peaks older than empire, there is breath. A farmer exhales into cupped hands before touching soil. A girl draws air between her teeth before weaving her first thread into the pattern of her people. A boy pauses at the river, his lungs full of wind scented with eucalyptus, before stepping across the stones. It is the same breath that rose 1,000 years ago. the same air that filled the lungs of emperors and servants, priests and warriors, weavers and watchers. The Inca knew breath as sacred. They saw it not as invisible, but as a connection between earth and sky, between the self and the unseen. Breath was prayer, breath was offering, breath was belonging. And so tonight, as the last candle in this long story flickers low, we do not end in silence, we end in breath, yours, mine, the world's, because the Inca story does not sleep in stone, it breathes, in the curve of a terrace still holding corn against the wind, in the way starlight touches the walls of Ollantaytambo, like a hand remembering a lover's face, in the smile of an old man who still chews coca leaves and tells stories that begin not with dates, but with sacred time. This breath, it is not history, it is presence, and that presence does not require belief, only attention. You do not have to know every name. You do not have to climb the Andes or read the patterns of ancient textiles. You only have to breathe, with care, with awareness, the way the Inca did, the way the mountains taught them. Let your breath slow now, not as sleep, but as ceremony. Inhale, as if drawing light from the same sun that once crowned a Sapa Inca. Exhale, as if offering it back to Pachamama, the ever-waiting earth. Inhale, and feel the rhythm of the empire, not in conquest, but in coherence. Exhale, and become part of the road, not a traveler above it, but a stone within it. You are not separate from this. You never were. Because this story, this long, winding tale of kings and couriers, of temples and threads, of silence and survival, has always been a mirror, a way to see yourself in the breath of those long gone, to remember that history is not what happened. It is what happens within you when you choose to carry something forward, not as burden, as gift. And now, as night falls again over fields once sung to with prayer, as llamas rest and stars take their watch, as wind strokes the stones of Cusco with ancient hands, you know the truth. The Inca did not vanish. They were never meant to last in the way empires pretend to. They were meant to breathe through time. And they do, in rhythm, in thread, in earth, in you. So rest now, wrapped in breath as old as the Andes. Let the story fold over you like a woven cloth, each word a thread, each silence a knot. Let your heartbeat settle to the pace of old roads. Let your dreams carry you up terraces, through temples, into suns that never set. Only wait. And when morning comes, rise not as someone who listened to history, but as someone who joined it. For you are breathing still, and the breath, like the empire, rises, always.